Cool. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit of a story today about this, basically the Marsh Fritillary in Northern England. And you notice I've added a little bit on the end and Southern Scotland. We'll go through some of the things that have been happening. It's a tale that goes back 20 years. I've kind of had a bit part role in some of it. Some of it I've been quite closely involved with, but there's so many people that have made this happen. I just hope it's interesting and relevant. You know, Apithanny mentioned about the need to kind of deliver work. This is a really good example of that, and fingers crossed the technology works. Okay, so if we can, I know we're kind of in a bit of a rush today, but if you can just take even 5 seconds just to look at these absolutely, stunning photographs of Marsh Fritillary, those kind of, to me, typify why we're all here today on a Saturday morning, just because it's such a magnificent species, really beautiful butterfly. And there's a mating pair. And something to bear in mind is there's a male and a female there, obviously, and the female is most easily identifiable, I guess, by the kind of size of abdomen, which is, kind of down to the number of eggs she carries on emergence from the chrysalis. Really heavy insect, and that actually plays a really big role in the ecology of this species, in terms of how it behaves and what it gets up to. This is the kind of habitat in Cumbria where we find the butterfly. I don't know if you can see in the foreground, there's these little wonderful purpley coloured, mauvey coloured flowers, which is devil's bit scabious. That's the plant that it lays its eggs on. And if you've not seen, a lot of you will have seen this plant before, but again, it's an absolutely stunning one. It's really good for pollinators, for hoverflies and for bees and stuff. And it's kind of got that flowering window that's quite late in the season. So it tends to come into flower, kind of August into September sort of thing, when there's a lot of the nectar sources have gone. So it really does draw things in to feed on the nectar. So what happens is that the Marsh Fritillary female, we've seen the picture with the big abdomen on her. She lays an initial bunch of eggs. You may not look it, I won't let you sit and count them all sort of thing, but you're kind of looking at a biggish sized batch. There's actually 2 primary egg batches there from different butterflies. And they'll lay anything from kind of 120 to maybe getting on 200 eggs in one of those batches sort of thing. And until that first batch is laid, the female butterfly is fairly immobile. She's carrying so much weight that, she actually finds it difficult to fly. So quite often, it's a real stay-at-home process where she lays those eggs. She cannot get very far from where she emerged as an adult. The dispersal is really limited. After that egg batch is gone and her weight load is diminished, she can fly further and lay a secondary batch, which obviously is smaller and can kind of disperse better. So what happens? Those are what they look like when they're laid. The eggs darken as they're due to hatch, as the caterpillars inside them develop. And once the caterpillars emerge, they basically feed on the devil's bit scabious leaves, as a collective group. Those caterpillars from those egg batches will feed together and they'll spin a web and feed within it. And quite often when the larvae are small, the webs are quite hard to spot. The biggest giveaway might be a section of dead leaves, something like that. And you can see at the bottom there, actually, there's these little brownish caterpillars that feed within that web. The reason, I guess it's a kind of almost a safety in numbers thing, but also as they get bigger, they actually bask. And because they're in a kind of mass, they are able to kind of absorb the solar radiation and elevate the body temperatures and develop much more quickly than they could do singly sort of thing. So they go through, basically they have 6 instars. They shed their skin 5 different times, sort of thing, as a caterpillar. They go through the winter usually as a kind of centimetre long size sort of thing, 3rd instar, and then they kind of emerge in the spring, still as a group, and form these kind of basking parties, if you like. And you can see that in the spring the scabious is really kind of quite poor quality, but as soon as it warms up, you'll start getting new leaves, and the caterpillars will all eat that. When they get big, they become kind of solitary, and it's kind of interesting to think that when they're about to pupate, the caterpillars wander quite a long way, and there will be instances where the dispersal of the butterfly is actually more pronounced in the caterpillar stage than it is as an adult. The females sometimes don't even move as far as the caterpillars. They turn into a chrysalis, same as all butterflies, and then kind of emerge as an adult, and the cycle starts again. The flight period's kind of end of May, something like that. Anyway, going back to Cumbria, there's been it's been a renowned area for marsh fritillaries for a lot of years, but there's been a kind of long-term decline that's really evident, sort of thing. These are kind of dates of last records for various population networks and various sites, and we can see what was happening. You can go through the various, through the 60s, through the 70s, and then so on and so forth, until we kind of left in 2004 with one site left at Middlescuff near Penrith, and lo and behold, that's the ultimate fate. And as the singer Mariah Carey said, "When it's gone, it's gone, it's gone." Which, I'm in the wrong business, aren't I? It's royalties of several $1 million, and yeah, but you kind of get the gist. Those are where the Cumbrian sites were, and you can see that it's not going to get recolonized naturally, sort of thing. The distance is simply too great for these butterflies to manage. Now, back in 2004, this is the site where the butterfly was last present in its kind of natural population, if you like. And I'll just introduce 3 of the characters on here. This gentleman here on the right is Steve Doyle, and each of these people made a really important contribution. Steve directed a lot of volunteer work, which we'll hear about shortly. Keith Porter he's retired now, Chief Scientist for Natural England, whose specialism is marsh fritillary butterflies. He was also County Recorder for Cumbria at 14 years old. So, as kind of volunteering goes, he was an early example. And then the gentleman at the back is Sam Ellis, my predecessor in North of England role, sort of thing, who did a lot of the work in getting farmers on board, getting sites managed, getting sites into condition, and doing a lot of the application for licenses and stuff like that to move these things about. So anyway, we were kind of stuck with the situation in 2004 when that picture was taken. That people there, I took the photograph, they were looking at the last web in Cumbria, sort of thing, the very last web that we found. It was split between a primary batch, and then there was a secondary batch about 1 metre away. We think that both were from the same female butterfly, and that was it. That was the moment that marsh fritillary in Cumbria became pretty much functionally extinct. So, there'd been work done previously. We knew the marsh fritillary was declining. We almost had a plan in place to kind of take it forward, but this just accelerated it. We knew that the butterfly was in big trouble. So, this is kind of going back a bit, but Keith Porter, the Natural England scientist, was able to get a license to take those last caterpillars into captivity. I think that was done over a weekend, which for any of you who've dealt with the kind of administrative side of conservation these days, it pretty much beggars belief that you could actually get that done over a weekend, get a license in place and get the larvae into captivity. Essentially, because we really strongly suspected that the caterpillars were from one female, with all the obvious implications of inbreeding. We were licensed, able to get a license to collect larvae from Scotland. We were permitted to take 5 caterpillars from webs maximum. So we got, I think, 19 sites that were essentially from Mull, Isla, and the mainland north and south of Oban sort of thing. So we did take a small number of your caterpillars, which I'm hoping I'll be forgiven for. And the captive breeding program, yeah, we essentially managed to get decent numbers of marsh fritillaries breeding in captivity. The important thing here is that all the work was done by volunteers, just about. Butterfly conservation staff did a few. I had some in my back garden, and various people had breeding cages. But the essential drive was from volunteers with Cumbria branch who reared the caterpillars for us. As you can see, you know, these things, like a lot of the rare species, aren't actually that difficult to rear in captivity. It's what happens when you release them that's the critical thing. And these are devil's bit scabious plants, looking suspiciously vigorous and healthy sort of thing. I think the growers might have been tweaking them with a bit of tomato feed or something like that. And, you know, we used to put them in the breeding cages with nectar plants. I think that's some kind of verbena sort of thing. So the butterflies essentially were put together, they'd pair up and lay eggs on the plants. And we've seen the pictures of the egg batches already sort of thing, so you know what I'm talking about. But these are kind of breeding cage things. Let's skip some of that. So out of the 2 larval webs that came from this last site, we got 140 Cumbrian larvae. Now, these were kind of distributed and mixed with the crossed with the Scottish butterflies that emerged from your larvae, if you like. And you can kind of see the scale of this, you know, this operation. We had people growing plants that were for, you know, the breeding cages, and not just these. We, you know, in the meantime, we were doing a lot of work on the sites, trying to restore the condition of the sites, because essentially the problems that we think the butterfly was experiencing was down to habitat, down to lack of management of the habitat, and, you know, things get vegetation getting too rank. And the butterflies, essentially, when the vegetation gets really rank, it becomes cooler, it becomes wetter, the sun's less able to penetrate, and the caterpillars aren't able to kind of elevate the body temperature in the way they need to. So slightly complicated, trying to work this out quickly. So we had 140 larvae that came from Cumbria. We had 95 larvae. That's 5 from 19 different sites from Scotland. These were paired up. We kept 21 of the Cumbrian adults together. We put 24 Cumbrian adults with 24 Scottish adults. And we kept a pure Scottish population going. So we had 3 different lines, if you like. And I won't go through all this sort of thing, but what I want you to look at is what happened to the Cumbrian ones, which we suspected came from one female. These, although we put some butterflies together, they only produced two egg batches. From those 2 egg batches, we got 1 larval web. This was in 2005. 2006, that 1 larval web, we still had about 100 caterpillars. Those produced 18 adults, and they produced 1 egg batch, which was infertile. So that essentially, that line died out, and we strongly suspect that's because it was just kind of inbreeding sort of thing. Contrast that with the numbers that were reared through this cross line, if you like, the Scottish and the Cumbrian, and we were, by 2007, we had about 50,000 larvae at a guess. We didn't count them all, but we had a big number of caterpillars ready for release. In the meantime, the 3-4 years between taking that web out of the countryside, a lot of work had been going on sites to improve them. So we put them out on 4 sites initially. We put them back at Middle Scuff, which is that site there, which is where the last webs were. We put them up at Fingland Rig National Nature Reserve up there. We put them at Braithwaite Moss near, if you know the lakes, that's near Bassenthwaite Lake. and down in Ennerdale sort of thing. So there were 4 release sites. And these, just roughly to give you a flavour of the sites, that's Middlescuff, that's Longmoor, that's the Ennerdale site. One of the things that Sam did, my predecessor, was actually badger the council into putting cattle grids on this little road so that the farmer was able to graze this site with cattle, which was, you know, part of this kind of restoration process, if you like. Fingland Rig National Nature Reserve there. And that's Braithwaite Moss. And that's an absolutely wonderful site, really good forested moth site as well. So, you know, things like Braithwaite Moss, there's a lot of strip fields, like really ancient field systems. And over the years, the ditches alongside it, because this is really flat land, this floods like crazy, had become overgrown with kind of alders and willows and birches and all the things that grow along the ditch lines sort of thing. So with, you know, using a lot of volunteer labour, we were able to open up those boundaries, because those narrow strip fields were getting too shaded. The trees simply cast shade right across those narrow fields sort of thing. So the area was opened up so the sun could get in. We had volunteers, as I said, doing a lot of the work. A lot of these plants that were grown were planted out. You can see here there's been rush cutting done. The farmers have had the tractors up and down that to cut the rushes. And we also had cattle. And strangely, I couldn't find any cattle pictures, but you can see they've been trampling and they've been depositing in big areas sort of thing. So that kind of promotes the regeneration of the scabious, if you like, which is obviously important. And there we've got a little scabious plant and some cattle dung sort of thing that gives you a kind of flavour for, you know, how they kind of trample the grassland down and break it up. Anyway, back to the captive breeding. We haven't been blackberrying here. These are actually full of caterpillars. Yeah, so there's kind of lots and lots and lots of caterpillars there. We didn't really. In fact, we did it basically by spooning them out. One of those spoons we reckoned had about 200 caterpillars in, which is kind of broadly in keeping with the size of the larval webs you'd expect, sort of thing. And these were kind of taken to various sites and released. And just interestingly, you know, nowadays we've got kind of GPSs and recording systems, and we can really map things with precision. Here, these guys were apparently working with an aerial photograph where they were putting dots on where the releases had taken place. And it's just kind of really interesting to see how the tech side of things has improved over the recent years. And, you know, this is a release batch, if you like, on a food plant. And these are the kind of numbers we were talking at. So across those 4 sites, we were releasing, you know, sort of big numbers, 5-figure numbers sometimes, onto the sites, which gives a kind of impression of the scale that we operated at. And that's essentially, these are the field strips I was on about, the strip fields with the narrow thing. So you can see that we, you know, again, my predecessor Sam Ellis did a lot of habitat condition assessments. The different colours of the fields basically denote the habitat condition when the releases took place, and that's the kind of how the larvae were distributed across the site. So and you know, a lot of monitoring effort went in going back. Those are adult counts where the adults were seen following the release, if you like, and then subsequent to that we check whether the resultant larval webs in the next generation were, sort of thing. So gradually the monitoring has come down to, we don't look for try and count egg batches, that will be too hard. This is to monitor numbers from year to year. So we don't count egg batches. We don't actually count adult butterflies. There are a couple of transects that record the adults, but really the weather's really horrible quite often in the flight period. So what we actually do to see how the numbers are changing over time is count how many larval webs we can find. And that's the prime principal means we have of monitoring. And every year, we have lots and lots of, still got the volunteer engagement there. we have lots and lots of volunteers who go out and count larval webs. And I don't know if Chris Winnick's in the room. He's the gentleman with the reasonably priced books on sale through there. He's one of our caterpillar counters, if you like. And that's how we need this. Hopping back to 2011, this is 4 years after the initial releases, and these were comments made by my predecessor, Sam Ellis, in a presentation that I partially pinched here. And these were lessons learned at that point. Creating captive stock is time-consuming but simple. You know, I hope you can see that the numbers we've generated work really well. It breeds really easily in captivity. It is a lot of work to underpin that, but it can be done. We also found that we had these split between 15, 20 different volunteers who were breeding them up for us. And some of them had total breeding failure for whatever reason. There were total losses on some of them. So, and it varied from year to year. It wasn't like we had one person who was really bad at breeding them and failed year on year. It could happen to any of us. It was just a kind of random effect almost, but dispersing the stock across a broad base of volunteers worked really well because it kind of wasn't all eggs in one basket kind of thing. The releases depended on releasing larvae that were well grown, sort of thing, that had been taken through the winter. We decided that was, you could protect them best, get the best numbers out there by, shielding them from predators and things in captivity. This is a really key one, that the habitat that they're released into has to have been restored, and it needs a kind of the different sites need management regimes in place, otherwise they would just degrade back into the conditions that, saw the butterfly disappear initially, sort of thing. And this is another comment that Sam made in his presentation. This was only the beginning, he was right there. And that he thought at that time that, reintroducing them to sites was easy, but landscapes were a challenge because he felt that the habitat was too fragmented for the butterflies to be able to disperse and colonize, additional sites, if you like. Well, we'll come back to that in a bit. Naturally, there's quite huge press interest, and periodically they still pick up on this. They still like the story. And it was a strong focus for local groups and local partners, conservation partners, sort of thing. So by 2011, we were kind of getting to the closing stages of releasing these butterflies. Obviously with any introduction, you don't want to keep having to put them out for it to survive. That's not really sustainable. We'd got to the point where we were winding down the captive breeding stock, and we'd put them onto 11 sites in total. I know there's not 11 sites marked there, but some of them are really quite close to one another. But since then, let's go back. So those are the release site, but since 2011, what we've found is that the Marsh Fritillary is spreading out. We've got them turning up all over the place, which is, really quite impressive. We didn't expect this to happen. Certainly Sam in 2011 didn't expect this to happen. I didn't, because we thought Marsh Fritillaries were inherently fairly sedentary. They didn't move between sites very easily. That has been proven really, really wrong. People have been picking these up on surveying for small blue on the Cumbrian coast, just individual butterflies. These are actually breeding populations, I should hasten to add. These aren't occasional wanderers. These are where we found webs where the butterflies are breeding. But there's been butterflies seen on the Cumbrian coast. We had Rosa Menendez and my colleague Martin Wayne were doing mountain ringlet surveys above Cat Bells near Derwentwater. I think they were 600 meters plus, and they found at least one Marsh Fritillary that was sort of up in the hills where you wouldn't expect it, sort of thing. And they've been seen from so many different places. These are mobile butterflies. They're not doing what they were supposed to do. Which is good. And now we get onto the interesting bit. This is some finds by Malcolm. I don't know if Malcolm's here today. He's watching online. Well, we're very, very pleased that Malcolm has managed to turn these up. We did know there were some found a couple of years ago near Lockerbie, but then this year, I believe, I hope I've got this right, that Malcolm found more by Chapel Knowe sort of thing. So, you know, not only have they kind of colonised Cumbria, they're now coming home. They want to be back, and who can blame them? But and there's a photograph, thanks David, of some of the genuine caterpillars from southwest Scotland that have apparently come from this hybrid race. So coming back to this notion of the butterflies moving about, some thought it'd be difficult for them to colonise landscapes based on what we knew. And in fact, this gentleman down here is E.B. Ford. He wrote a really famous book on butterflies. I don't know if Chris is selling it through in the lunch hall, but he and his father were born in Cumbria. He's a top level, you know, he was an evolutionary geneticist. And they studied a population of marsh fritillaries in Cumbria for 19 years. And there's a bleak reference to them never moving out away from the habitat. They never found them outside I think it quoted a section of several marshy fields where they used to go year on year. They never saw them beyond that. And similarly, the pattern of records from across Cumbria were the same. They were living in rush pastures habitats, which is, you know, kind of basically swampy fields, as Mr. Ford described them. And they didn't move away from those. And this is broadly what we see in a lot of southern England. They tend to be really sedentary. But we kind of wonder whether bringing genes from the Scottish population and creating this hybrid has actually resulted in a butterfly that's got a far greater tendency to move between sites. You know, are the butterflies slightly lighter? You know, are they laying fewer eggs? And I think we've got some evidence to support that, because the habitats that the butterflies are using now, as well as being in the rush pastures, which of course was where we thought was best place to release them, they're actually using kind of boggy flush habitats. You know, lots of sphagnum moss, where the plants, the scabious plants, really don't grow very big because of the water table or the acidity or whatever, but the plants stay really small. And instead of laying these really big egg batches, what we're finding is tiny, tiny webs with a really small number of caterpillars in, maybe 15, 20 caterpillars. And what we can think is happening is that the butterfly is actually using these as stepping stones to get from the, you know, out from the sites that it used to be in. And it's actually behaving maybe more similarly to what the butterfly does in the west coast of Scotland. And it's just a really, really interesting notion that, you know, what we've put back is different, and it seems to actually work better than the one that was there initially. So winding down a bit, we've released it to, I said 11, I've put 12 sites there. I think maybe 12 is right. But now we've recorded breeding at probably 35 plus sites this year. We're kind of at a stage now where we get new sites. This doesn't include the newly discovered Scottish sites, by the way, either sort of thing. And as I said, it's been discovered, you know, individuals have been seen wandering all over the place sort of thing. So we're talking about a mobile butterfly that's really, really colonised strongly. So kind of closing comments, I guess. Marsh Fritillary is back in Cumbria, no doubt about it. You know, we've not introduced anything for 13 years there sort of thing, and the populations are really thriving. Those Cumbrian populations are the only ones in the whole of the north of England, basically from Lincolnshire northwards, really. There's an isolated set of sites there. It's also in southwest Scotland, which is great. Mentioned the volunteer effort, the buy-in, and this is, you know, this has been the greatest success for me is the number of people who've contributed to this project over, you know, 20 plus years. is fantastic. You know, we do training days now to train volunteers to count the webs. And there's you know, we get, you know, 25, 30 different people a year coming to the training sessions, and then they go out and count the webs. You know, the original people who were recording, quite a few of them are kind of retired or off the scene now, but the effort is still there, sort of thing. And usually at the end, you kind of thank all the partners and stuff, but really, it's not needed. You know, everyone who's been involved has got far greater reward than any amount of thanks by having this kind of wonderful creature back on the scene. So, yeah, that's the story of the Marsh Fritillary in Cumbria. I hope it's been interesting.
Thank you, Dave. That was absolutely brilliant. A great story. And I think it really shows the power of volunteers. And thank you for getting us to take a moment and just enjoy that beautiful photo as well, because that is indeed why we're all here. Any questions for Dave?
Dave, thank you very much. That was really enjoyable. I know that in many places, Marsh Fritillary has a very strong interaction with parasitic wasps, and that has a big impact on its population dynamics. If it became virtually extinct, did its parasitoids become extinct? And now you have populations back, are the parasites back as well? I don't know whether you can tell me that.
It's well known that Marsh Fritillaries have kind of host-specific parasites that lay eggs on the caterpillars. And Mark's essentially asked me about the role that the parasites or lack of has played in that revival. Would that be a fair summary, Mark? Yeah. So what I would say is that as far as we know, the Catesias, the parasites that specifically target Marsh Fritillary caterpillars, are not present in Cumbria. Now, there is a debate about whether we should put those back as well, because as a, you know, well, no, you think about it. They're actually a lot rarer than Marsh Fritillaries, because they need the Marsh Fritillaries, and if there's no Marsh Fritillaries, there's been no parasites either. I have to say it's a discussion I've tried to open up. It's not a popular one with quite a lot of the volunteers. And I think one of the things to consider is that those parasites, those host-specific parasites, have never been recorded from Cumbria. We don't know if they were actually there initially, sort of thing. So there are a few issues there. I think it's important to remember as well that there are, you know, plenty of other parasitoids that will lay eggs in Marsh Fritillary, sort of thing. So it's not like they're totally removed from the threat of being parasitized. Yeah, if you want to persuade my volunteers we should put them back, Mark, I'll give them your email address, and you can try and convince them.
Yeah, so I've got a question from someone online who's asking, well, two parts to this. What is the largest distance the Marsh Fritillary is spread to in Cumbria from release sites? And the second part of it is, could the ones around Lockerbie or the Scottish ones be a result of surreptitious releasing?
Yeah. I would be surprised in this day and age if no one had tried to turn their own hand to releasing stuff, sort of thing. So possibly some of those have been assisted. You know, some of the ones I'm representing as a colonisation success have been assisted. But, you know, the fact that we're seeing the butterflies in so many different places, and the sheer scale of colonisation, I don't think that it plays a significant role in it. Personally, I think you would have to have an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of you know, marsh frit habitat in Cumbria, and you know, there's so many little stepping stone sites. Now, the maximum distances are certainly kilometres, quite often tens of kilometres. The problem is that we don't know whether that's been one jump or whether it's been a series of jumps, because we haven't got the coverage to be able to explore all the intervening habitat. I mean, we would seriously, you know, there's so many potential places where they could have been in between, a bit like the ones in southwest Scotland. We knew about the ones near Lockerbie, and there were some discovered, you know, in between earlier this year, but that doesn't mean to say that the that may just be the way the surveys have, or people have found them as happened, rather than it may well be that the colonies nearer to Gretna were there previously, but weren't discovered until after the one further north. So it's kind of difficult to know. There are probably, well, there will certainly be more sites than we know of in between. So the kind of maximum distance is, she's probably, I'm trying to think, I wouldn't like to put a figure on it, but certainly 20 kilometres. But we don't know whether that 20 kilometres has happened as one jump. We suspect that it's probably been a sequence of jumps. And of course, if they're using little stepping stones, flushes, and sort of small sites in between, we may lose those. The number of we may get a couple of webs there, after which adults disperse further. We may lose that site, so we've not got that kind of full evidence, if you like, as to how exactly they're distributing themselves.
It's just another possibility for the two sites in southwest Scotland is that they might always have been there. And there are records very old records from the borders even. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that no DNA testing has been done to confirm that they are the Scottish-English hybrid population. Okay.
So the gentleman in the audience has just asked whether it's possible that there have been relic populations there. We're not entirely sure that there hasn't been in Cumbria. Obviously, DNA analysis would do a lot to confirm that. We did have a researcher from Edge Hill University who actually got a license to collect some of the stock from the Lockerbie site, which I believe she did, and from some of the English sites. And she was going to run the genetic testing against that to sort of see whether the origins were the same. Unfortunately, during COVID, she changed jobs. The material was lost. It's a piece of work that really, really needs doing, sort of thing, because I may be misrepresenting this. I don't know. I'm doing it on the best knowledge I have available. But you're absolutely quite right. There is a possibility that there are relic populations. And, people like yourself have said as much to me about exactly the same about Cumbria. Oh, well, such and such a site, which we didn't know about, we've never surveyed. There could be relic populations there, but they're not shown up in recent records. That's all we can go on, really, until we get that genetic testing done. So it's a good question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave.
Cheers. Thank you.
So continuing on the theme of volunteer impact, we have one of our very own volunteers speaking today. Lesley Gordon from East Scotland branch is going to tell us about the volunteer projects she's been doing in Fife.
Okay, I'm Lesley Gordon and I live in Aberdour in Fife, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the stuff that has been developing with butterfly conservation over the last about 5 or 6 years. Okay, how did I get involved first with butterfly conservation? Well, my first involvement came in looking to do practical work with work parties. And I discovered that there were work parties running in Edinburgh run by Anthony, and they were at Silver Knowes, Carlton Hill, Salisbury Crags. So there was plenty going on to keep me entertained. And then sadly, COVID struck and everything stopped completely. But nothing daunted, Anthony went online and did Zoom classes with us where we learned about Scottish butterflies, and we also learned about their habitats and their food plants. And also he started training us up for public engagement, talking in public. And one of the things we were really worried about was that our audience, perhaps they would have a lot of knowledge. But one person said, oh no, the audience that you're talking to will always have less knowledge than you. Oops, definitely not in this case. But then that's not my role. It's awe-inspiring, the knowledge that would be in this room. But I actually am never going to acquire that knowledge. So what I'm doing instead is trying to engage the public. And what actually made me choose public engagement? Well, for over 30 years, I was actually involved in junior public engagement at Inverkeithing High School in Fife, where I was a biology teacher and I led Eco School project as well. So I took my first tentative steps in 2022 when I designed a talk to do at our local Aberdare festival. Not too daunting because it's quite small. So butterflies of the fourth and how to help them. I would give the audience a little bit of information about what butterfly conservation does, and also tell them a little bit about the transect that I actually walk, which is at an ex-reservoir called Killaloe, just outside Aberdare, and it's very beautiful. So it's a very enjoyable thing to do. But being a teacher, I wanted to get them involved. Paper and pencil, good thing for teachers. So what butterflies did they know? Well, a few of them knew this one, and all of them knew this one. Yeah, and I knew I was in trouble when we got to that. So instead, teacher tactic, go for a multiple choice. Now, who doesn't like a multiple choice? After all, you've got at least one answer that you can guess. So we gave them choices. About 8 butterflies, I think, in total were put up on their screen. This is a new one that's been appearing in Aberdare, so I thought I would use it. So yeah, they could either just write down the letter, and of course, they're so competitive, they wanted to know how much better they had done than somebody else round about them. So it worked out quite well. I also wanted to tell them a little bit about the speckled wood, because that's been appearing in very large numbers around Aberdare. So it's something now people keep coming and telling me that they have seen one. And also the northern brown argus. And why? Because we have got a small colony at a place called Brayfoot, which is halfway between Aberdare and Dalgetty Bay. So encouraging people to go out, walk out there and see if they can see it. It has an abundance of rock rose. But the real point of my talks was, we've already kind of mentioned it a bit, is this disastrous reduction in the number of butterflies. So tell them a little bit about the threats and the numbers crashing, and particularly, of course, in the most recent big butterfly count. But then I point out that gardens can be part of the solution. So it talks to them about the kind of plants that you would put in, those that bear nectar and pollen, because so many of the modern hybrids, particularly the ones in hanging baskets, don't do anything for pollinators at all. Also talking about open flowers, the more old-fashioned kind of flowers that the butterflies can actually access the nectaries and the pollen sacs. So also, courtesy of Anthony, I have lists of the right kind of plants that you plant at different times of year to encourage pollinators into your garden. And I loved this because this appeared on the East of Scotland Facebook group last year. And somebody put in a picture. Well, we had a lot of red admirals, but boy, how good was ivy for these late red admirals? And I asked him if I might use it in my presentations, and he very happily gave me permission. So now it's become part of my different presentations. And I think I'm right in saying it was Dan Hoare who came out. I heard it on the morning of the big butterfly count this year, who said that gardeners in Britain have an obsession with tidiness. And that really stuck in my brain because, yes, don't be too tidy in your gardens. People just want everything so pristine. Leave the leaves, leave the twigs. Look at this. I asked them, what's that? And everyone says, oh, a thorn. But no, of course it isn't. And in our case in Fife, once it goes in the brown bin in autumn time, it's on a one-way journey to the anaerobic digester at Glenrothes. So how much is killed at the end of a season? Tell them a little bit about wild spaces. I don't expect you to read that. It's just a bit of information that I give them. Also, I try very hard to get them to put in the iRecord butterfly app. And, of course, to do the big butterfly count. So I was absolutely amazed. Once you talk in public, everybody wants a bit of that because they're trying to find speakers for men's probus, ladies' probus, women's rurals, lunch clubs, friendship clubs, church groups. It was quite remarkable how many talks actually generated out of this 2022 presentation. The best one, though, was our local care home. And it was just delightful to see the elderly residents living again the joy of the butterflies that they had experienced mostly in their childhood. But they took it on and they actually changed the planting in their garden to make it more pollinator friendly. So, success. 2023, I didn't want to do another talk at the festival, so instead branched out and did a moth count and a moth trap instead. My husband made the moth trap. You can see it starring at the front of the photograph, but it seemed to work. We got 8 different kinds of moths, and the people were absolutely fascinated. You put something inside a jar that they can hold on to and look at, and they really are fascinated, particularly the children. So it all was going terribly well, and we're taking little moths in their tubs and letting them out at the door. This site is actually a permaculture site, which is close to Aberdour. It's run by my friend. And so we're letting the moths go until we let go the July high flyer. Off it went, hotly pursued by a predatory bird, much to the upset of the children. So you have to kind of explain nature raw in tooth and claw. And also that year, I started doing some walks at the transect because it is so lovely. It's been fantastic this year. The flowers have been amazing. But so friendship groups, families, individuals, lots of walks. And I try to encourage people to go up there because it really is beautiful. But also, at the same time, a group of friends, we got together and we now do some biodiversity work in Aberdour. And what you see here is at Whitehill Field, which is about half a mile north of Aberdour, and it's being rewilded. It was rotivated, and then the next season it was cut. And you see they're taking off the excess vegetation. And in the following spring, the seeds were planted. And what happened? Well, there's the result. Early in the next season, you can see the Viper's bugloss growing there. That's sort of facing northeast. And later in the season, facing southwest, the later flowers, wild carrot, tansy, yarrow, self-heal, and of course the teasels, which are absolutely fantastic. So success. But we don't only do that. We're talking about rank vegetation just a while ago. There's a lovely walk in Aberdour which goes from Aberdour Harbour out to the Hawkcraig Point called Ladies' Walk. And it has over many years begun to be covered, particularly in ivy, and gorse is also growing there. So the small sort of herb layer of flowers has been disappearing. So we've set to and have started to remove the ivy and the gorse, and the result, It was wonderful this year. So many people commented on the fact that there were so many more flowers. So you've got trefoils, rock rose, herb Robert, we've got the bloody cranesbill, and some of these are food plants for butterflies. So fingers crossed, sorry, for caterpillars, fingers crossed we will get the butterflies coming. Okay, also working with younger butterfly enthusiasts, and I've got one example here. These are the cubs in Aberdare. Again, this is my friend's permaculture site. Doors open of cars, and a feral bunch of cubs come rushing out of the cars, straight into the orchard, roly-polies all over the place, chasing each other, getting some berries to eat. And then we trapped a butterfly. Whew. Attention, instant attention. One butterfly, one speckled wood. And that's what happened. And that dad was just as interested as the kids. He was absolutely fascinated. So we told them about, well, I told them about the butterflies. And then I went on to do a little game inside the polytunnel that you can see there. So I've got some characters to introduce to you. So only 3 of these ones, there are actually 10, and they have proved incredibly useful. They're really, really useful. They each have a number on the back, and some of them have a wee hint as to the pages that you can find them, because of course their task is to get the children to identify what they are. And usefully, Butterfly Conservation has a booklet, Butterflies and Day-Flying Moths of Tayside and Fife. So the kids get involved in trying to work out which butterfly is actually which. And here we go. Look at the engagement in those children. Now, the fact that they were put in teams, so it was a bit competitive, actually probably made a bit of a difference. But you know, earlier on they had been, just as I say, feral, and now they're completely engaged. So these little characters have proved very useful because I'm now using them at primary schools. And this one is at Kinghorn, just along the coast from Aberdare. And the children had to go out, they were hidden around, and they had to bring the butterflies in. And then we worked out the sets, and there were 3 different groups, and they got to try and work out what the butterflies were. And it went down really, really well. Another project, back to Inverkeithing High School. And it's really rather sad because I used to run that garden. And at that time, it looked entirely different. Now it's covered in rank grasses, particularly over here, which is, there's this. This was an orchard area. And the poor little trees keep trying to produce some apples on them, but they're nothing like they used to be. So what could we do about it? Well, one of the slightly less academic groupings is an S45 outdoor learning class, and they decided that they wanted to benefit butterflies. So they would set about making a little meadow. They had to measure and work out how much seed they would need to plant out these small areas. They then made a model, which you'll see in a minute, that they submitted to Butterfly Conservation Committee, but they each took a butterfly and did a project so that around the classroom, they had each of the butterflies with information about them. So other pupils in the school would also see something about butterflies. They then submitted their application, and thank you, Butterfly Conservation, for giving them a grant. So there's their model that they submitted with the different areas. And in fact, I'll just show you where. The areas that are going to be planted are here and over here with the orchard. So this is them setting 2. The strimmer taking out the rank grasses first, then raking and scarifying the areas, and then setting the seed. Sadly, I don't have a results picture for you because there was a bit of a muddle with head teachers and changing over timetables. So in fact, we only managed to get the garden planted in late June. So there are some little flowers coming up, but they are rather small at the moment, and I didn't think they were worth photographing. But the project is to continue. An S3 group, a mental health group actually, are going to be continuing the project. 2024. And I took my life in my hands because my last comment when I'd done the 2022 butterfly talk was, well, my next talk will be about moths, and there's only 2,500 of them. So they thought I was joking. But actually, no, I decided that I would tackle the moths because people know so little about them. And actually, I was earwigging when I was sitting there and hearing about clothes moths. And that's actually the only kind of moths that most people know. They just don't know about the wonderful kind of moths that are out there. So we tried to give them a little bit about the different kind of moths which can be found in Fife, and again, how to help them in your garden. And I did have great help from Dorothy Lyle, who kept me right about all things moth. So what am I doing in the future? Well, I've managed to worm my way into Village in Bloom in Aberdour, which they've actually come up against a big problem. They haven't got enough volunteers to do all the watering for all the containers. And that's good news because, of course, what they're doing is they're putting the plastic plants into those containers, and they're looking for more long-term plants that don't require so much looking after. And that tends to mean the plants which have more pollen and more nectar. So hopefully we will be making a change. I'm also going to be working now with Gallatown Nursery in Kirkcaldy with the little children, teaching them about butterflies and moths and working a little bit in their garden area as well to improve the planting. And I will continue with projects at Inverkeithing High and at Kinghorn Primary, and I think I've got another school in the wings now as well. And this one I like. This is Aberdour Station, and it's an absolute little gem. It's a gorgeous little station, and it's got lovely planting, but oh dear. Of course, if you look at the hanging baskets, they're just full of plastic plants that are of no benefit to pollinators. So I'm going to be talking with the person who runs the planting schemes, and we're going to be trying to put more plants into the hanging baskets, which will be pollinator friendly. But this is my little patch. A friend and I do this one. So if you ever come to Aberdour, this little greenhouse next year will have our cast of characters in it. We're going to put the butterflies along the window to sort of start discussions with people who are on the station. And also this little patch in front is being planted up with pollinator-friendly plants. We're extending that also into these areas up here. So fingers crossed, Aberdour Station will be more pollinator-friendly. Okay, just before I do that, can I just say a massive thank you to Anthony, because he supports me in all my out there ideas. I always get support from him. Also to Elspeth and to Gillian, the Fife recorders, also very supportive. To Dorothy, because she keeps me right on all things moth. And to Lesley, my work party friend. I also want to say, if you want to go for public engagement, do it. Just do it. You will get all the support you need from butterfly conservation. And if you don't mind talking in public, it really isn't that bad. So thank you for listening. And I think I might have a very brief moment for questions.
Thank you, Lesley. That was absolutely lovely. I'm a little bit in awe, actually, of everything that you've done. Isn't it amazing? And we have so many new people in the audience today, so I hope you're all feeling inspired and you've got some ideas of what you can do in your own local communities. Does anybody have any questions for Lesley?
Nice one. Lesley, that was brilliant. Can I just ask, the work you do with the schools, do they approach you and ask you whether do they come to you, or do you sort of see an opportunity and approach the school sort of thing?
Well, with inverkeeling, obviously I already had a link. I haven't really broken that link because I did work with them even after I retired. But no, Kinghorn approached me, Galatown have approached me. So no, I'm quite happy for any schools to come and ask.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Lesley. We've heard quite a lot about butterflies this morning, and now it is time to hear more about our moth conservation projects. We have our own David Hill speaking to us now. I like the name of your talk, David. It's very creative.
Hello. So today I'm going to talk about my experiences in surveying for a couple of species of rare moth in Argyll. So for anyone who doesn't closely follow butterfly conservation's conservation strategy, we have around 26 species in Scotland which we are focusing our efforts on that we want to try and improve the fortunes of. 5 of these are butterflies and about a dozen or so are larger moths. But there's also these 9 micro moths on that list. As you can see on the list there, many of these species are really only known at one site within the UK or in Scotland. So they're really quite rare species. The one that stands out perhaps is this one. This is Inania funebris, or the white-spotted sable moth. In Scotland, this is only known from a handful of sites, but it's also known from a few places in Kent and South Wales in the UK. At a quick glance of its Scottish range, you'll see that it looks to be fairly widespread in Scotland. But this actually masks the story a little bit. So if we look at this, there's 4 areas there where the moth has technically been recorded, but we don't actually have any details of those sightings. So that's in Roxburghshire and right through the islands on the west coast. These records or sightings appear in a book in the 1960s to say that the moth was seen here, but no one's actually got any details of the exact sightings of those moths. So at the moment, the only places that we know the moth actually exists are these sites here on this map. So this is all quite in a small area of Argyll and part of Lochaber. So for anyone who doesn't know the area, I'm showing Oban on my cursor there. So Glassdrum National Nature Reserve is a very well-known spot for lepidopterists, and that is where most records of this moth come from in Scotland. Glenant in Innar is also quite a well-known spot, and all of the other places that this moth has been recorded that we have an actual record for are in Glenetive, or the Glencreran area. The other site is at the Glensanda Super Quarry. So if anyone knows that, they'll know it's inaccessible apart from by boat, and you need special permissions to get there. So it's not somewhere that we can go and easily survey. So that, to our knowledge, at the moment, is the only places the moth has been seen. It's certainly in the last 30 or 40 years. And this century, almost every single record we have of this moth comes from Glassdrum National Nature Reserve. So that is almost always people who are going there to look for the checkered skipper. It's the site to go and look for checkered skipper in Scotland. So a lot of people come up from the south or visitors from elsewhere in Scotland. They go and look for checkered skipper, and this is on the wing at the same time, and they record it. But we don't get records from all the other sites. So how can such a distinctive species be going so unnoticed? Well, it's quite small. So it has a wingspan of around 2 centimetres. So I guess that's something akin to a pound coin in width. For comparison, some of you will hopefully know the small blue butterfly. That is our smallest species in the UK, and that has a wingspan which is about 50% larger than the white-spotted sable. So, and everybody who sees a small blade for the first time always comments on how small it is. So we are talking about quite a small moth, although in micromoth terms, it's not that small. But there's possibly another reason why we don't get many records of this moth, and this is why. So this cracking photo here shows the moth hiding under a leaf. And our colleagues in England tell us that this is quite common behaviour, particularly in when the weather isn't sunny, but also sometimes when the weather is sunny, the moth is actually just hidden away. So one method to survey for the adults is actually to take a stick out into the field and tap vegetation to disturb them. When they're flying, they have this very distinctive spiraling flight, which is really interesting to see, but it also makes them quite hard to follow because they're quite small and they have this funny distinctive whirring flight. But a spectacular moth nonetheless. So this is the classic site for seeing it in Scotland. This is the glass drum wayleave, the infamous wayleave, where everybody goes to look for checkered skipper. And this is where we receive most of the white-spotted sable records from. And the reason it's there is this plant in the photo here, which is these yellow spikes. There's a closer image of it. These yellow spikes are the plant goldenrod. So goldenrod is a local plant in Scotland, I think you would say. It's fairly widespread, but it only occurs very, very locally. It's also very susceptible to grazing pressures. So deer love to eat it, as well as other grazing stock. As I say, this is the only plant that the caterpillar will eat. And here is one of the caterpillars feeding on the plant. So our colleagues in England again tell us that this is a viable way to survey for the moth, is to look for the caterpillars on the food plant at the right time of year. So last year when we were sorting out in Scotland who was going to work on which species, I put my hand up to work on this one. And what I wanted to do was visit all of the previously known sites where we had an actual record to see if I could confirm the presence of the moth. And I thought, well, it's Argyll, it'll be raining, it'll be hard to get the weather to get surveys in to look for the adults. So you know what, I'll go and look for caterpillars. Early August seemed to me to be about the right time, given that the moth flies between May and July, judging by the records that we have of the adult moths. Caterpillars prior to last year had never been recorded in Scotland before, to our knowledge. So how did I get on? Well, it took me 3 days to go around all of the known sites and check the goldenrod plants that I could find for caterpillars. So that was 3 quite long days in the field for a grand total of 1 caterpillar, which was slightly demoralising. Here was the caterpillar, which was found at Glenmant National Nature Reserve on my first day of surveying. So the next 2 days were completely fruitless. And what I realised quite quickly was that I was too late. So my colleagues in England and Wales who've been searching for the moth told me that the moth has quite distinctive feeding damage, and what I was finding was that I was finding lots of feeding damage that looked a little bit old, maybe a few weeks old, and I wasn't finding any caterpillars, but there was lots of this damage on the goldenrod. So what the caterpillar does, it sits under the leaf and it eats partially through the leaf, but not all the way through when it's young. And it leaves these kind of, eventually these kind of brown, almost see-through windows in the leaf. As the caterpillar gets older, it starts to eat into these full-depth oblong blotches, which again are relatively distinctive, but slugs and things can also make damage like this. So on its own, the damage isn't conclusive that the moth might be there, but I felt that I was finding enough damage that it was probably likely to be present at a lot of the sites. It was just that I was too late. The caterpillars had obviously finished and gone down for the winter. So I did feel like I was getting a bit of a handle on what the habitat was like at all of these sites. There was a common thread in that most of them seemed to be your classic, almost archetypal West Coast Atlantic oak woodland, or remnants, where there was some kind of that kind of habitat left. Generally, I was finding the goldenrod beside tracks or paths, which again probably makes sense because that's where there's quite a lot of disturbance from humans, so there's less grazing and there's a bit of light, so that tends to work for the goldenrod. I was finding mostly the goldenrod was either partially shaded or lightly shaded. I wasn't finding feeding damage where the goldenrod was in really deep shade. And equally, sites didn't seem to be particularly exposed. At some sites, I didn't find much goldenrod, so that was a bit of a concern. But I did find it at almost all of the sites. And at Glasdrum and Glenant, there was a lot of goldenrod. So skipping forward to this last summer, 2024, I had to wait almost a year to go out and repeat my survey, of course. So I decided to bring it forward by about 3 weeks this time, and I went out in mid to late July. And I did better. So this time, in the 3 survey days that it took me to go around all the sites again, I found a total of 30 caterpillars. So these are the sites where I found it. So the green dots show the sites where I found caterpillars. The white dots show sites that I either didn't visit, Glensanda, or where I did visit and didn't find the moth. And the orange ones are potentially new sites for the moth. So this was Glenant, where I went first on my survey day. And if you've ever been to Glenant, there's a lovely forest road going through the forest, and on the verges of this road is just chock full of goldenrod for about half a kilometre. It's like really, really full of goldenrod. So it took me most of an afternoon just to walk along that track and count the caterpillars that I was finding and record some of their details. So there's photos of them there. By the end of the day at Glenant, I'd recorded 20 caterpillars, which was, compared to the previous year, was amazing. I had a wee bit of time that afternoon after finishing at Glenant, so I just took a punt and walked up a forest road a few miles away where I knew there might be some goldenrod. And quite quickly I came across this massive pile of gravel where you can see the wires between, it's just by the side of a forest road. It's being used for all kinds of things. But there was goldenrod growing out of this enormous pile. And right away I found a caterpillar. So that was a bit of a surprise, but also potentially a new site. So at this point, I was feeling particularly smug with myself. Things were going in the right direction. I've cracked it, kind of thing. And over the next day or so, I explored some of the other sites. So at Glasdrum, I quickly worked out that I was actually still too late. So perhaps Glasdrum's a little bit of a warmer site, and the moth goes through its life cycle a little bit quicker at Glasdrum. I'm not sure. There's a huge amount of goldenrod there, and there was lots of feeding damage, but I just couldn't find any caterpillars until I was walking along the road at on the way back to the car, and I found some goldenrod by the side of the road, and there was a couple of caterpillars there. This was one of the sites in Glenetive. Again, that kind of typical habitat that I was expecting. Goldenrod growing on a bank beside a track. And again, there was the moth. Or there were caterpillars, sorry. And that's when it all started to go a little bit pear-shaped. In terms of me being confident as to what I was actually finding. So this was also in Glenetive. And I'd been here the previous year and not been able to find any goldenrod. The original record of the moth was from the 1980s. And there wasn't very much information with the record, but I had been previously in email contact with the person whose name was against the record. So I just contacted them and asked if they remembered anything. Amazingly, near enough 40 years later, they were able to tell me roughly where they'd seen the moth, on the north side of the road. So I went back, and on the north side of the road, it was just a sea of bog myrtle and purple moorgrass, Molinia. So yeah, kind of just like very wet, acid heath. Not really goldenrod habitat. But I did find this sole spike of goldenrod growing beside a small boulder in a very slightly drier bit of the bog. And amazingly, there was a caterpillar on that one bit of goldenrod. And it certainly wasn't West Coast woodland type habitat. So that started to get me thinking a bit more and started to puzzle me. On my way out of the glen at the end of the day, right up the eastern end, where the glen's a bit higher, it's certainly much more exposed. I came to this large area of bog, and I just happened to see some goldenrod in the ditch as I was driving by. So I pulled up and thought I'd give it a go. I mean, you can see how kind of mountainous and exposed this kind of area is. But again, there was a caterpillar feeding on the goldenrod in the ditch amongst bog myrtle and, well, bog vegetation, really. So I was starting to doubt whether all of my caterpillars were definitely white-spotted sable. And this is where this other species potentially comes into play. So this is Inania terrialis, as opposed to the Inania funebris, which is white-spotted sable. You can see from the photo here, which I've taken from the UK Moths website, it's a very different looking moth. It's not that bright black and white with the lovely little gold fringes that white-spotted sable has. It's a really drab looking thing. And this is one of the better looking moths images that I could find on the internet of this species. So Inania terrialis also feeds on goldenrod. There are scattered records from much of Scotland, like very scattered, including some up the west coast and including some in Glen Etive. So they are almost certainly occurring at some of the same sites that Inania funebris is. The caterpillars look quite similar. Colleagues in England think that the caterpillars of terrialis have a more speckled head than the caterpillars of funebris, but obviously that's a somewhat subjective thing. And is that constant through the different instars of the moth? As the caterpillar grows older, might that change or not? We're not sure. It's also thought that Inania terrialis caterpillars feed with lots of silk being present. And I didn't see much silk on the caterpillars that I've seen. And also terrialis may frequent the flowers in terms of feeding more than the leaves. Again, not something I saw with the caterpillars that I was spotting. But really, we don't know an awful lot about the feeding habits of Inania terrialis in Scotland, other than it feeds on goldenrod and a few locations where it's found. So I think this species has muddied the waters slightly, and my hopes that we can survey for Inania funebris, the white-spotted sable, purely by looking for caterpillars may be somewhat dashed. As a method, it is quite easy to find the caterpillars, providing you're there at the right time of year. But whether you can be absolutely certain on the species or not is the question. So in terms of future work, well, I'm trying to rear, I've written caterpillars there, but a caterpillar that I collected. So eggs in one basket, I'm hoping I'm going to be able to rear that over the winter and see which species it turns into. I'm going to try adult surveys at the known sites just to see how difficult or hopefully easy that might be. And I think the big one really is to actually go out at the right time of year next year and look for Inania terrialis. at sites where it's certainly present, and we can be fairly confident that white-spotted sable isn't present, and look to see if the caterpillars look any different. Are they feeding in the flowers? Are they feeding with lots of silk? Ultimately, the question that I have is, if Anania terrialis occurs at these sites where Anania funebris does, why wasn't I finding them if they look different? So hopefully I can make some progress on that next year. The second species I want to talk about is a very different one. It's a much larger moth, and one that, well, certainly the family of the Burnets will be familiar to many of you, I hope. So this is the transparent Burnet moth, and it's one of the species that we're focusing on within the Species on the Edge project. So for a wee bit of Burnet background and ID, here are 4 of the species that we have in Scotland. So the one that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with is the 6-spot Burnet. So you will see these zooming around, particularly on coastal grasslands, through kind of midsummer. Quite a big chunky moth, very black and red, and very, very fast in flight. Really distinctive if you find one. And helpfully they have these 6 clear spots. When fresh, the 6 spots are usually pretty clear. The second most common species now in Scotland is the narrow bordered 5-spot, bit of a mouthful, and it has 5 spots, as the name suggests. It's been doing really quite well in Scotland in the last few years, and it's pushed north of the border, particularly up the east coast, through Berwickshire, right into the Lothians, and now spreading across the central belt. It seems to be moving into a lot of sites where 6-spot Burnet has been found. So it'll be interesting to watch as the population dynamics of those 2 species may affect or not, may affect each other or not. So then we've got the middle 2 species, and these are both quite rare in Scottish terms. So the slender Scotch Burnet is the rarer of these 4. It's only found on the Isle of Mull, but is found at some transparent Burnet sites. It looks a little bit like your 6-spot Burnet, but it's got the last 2 spots fused together. Sometimes 6-spot Burnet has spots fused together, so what is good to do is to look at the legs. 6-spot Burnet has black legs, whereas the slender Scotch has these pale legs that you can see in the photo there. But as I say, this is a really rare species, only found on the Isle of Mull. Transparent Burnet is a little less rare. It's a bit more widespread on the west coast, but it's really easy to identify. Instead of spots, it has these large elongated splodges, and it's got 3 of them. And also the wings are slightly translucent, hence the name. The other thing that's really cool about transparent Burnet is its flight. So whilst the 6-spot bombs around at 100 miles an hour, the transparents fly around like bumblebees. Like me, they are slow and they're dopey. They're not really going anywhere fast. They're not really going anywhere with any sense of real purpose, it seems. They just kind of bumble about. And on a nice sunny day, there they are, just lovelily bumbling about. So yeah, this is the species I'm going to talk a bit more about. I mentioned the slender Scotch Burnet and I mentioned the transparent Burnet. There's 2 other rare West Coast Burnet species, but this is the most widespread of the 4. We know it's a species that can be under threat. It was last seen in Wales in 1962 and it's now considered extinct there. It's fairly rarely recorded in Scotland unless people go to specifically seek it out. We don't receive many records of it at all. Usually its sites are slightly off the beaten track, which is probably why. So this is its range in Scotland. So it ranges from Skye in the north to the very tip of the Mull of Kintyre in the south. In between it inhabits the small isles, Mull, some islands around Mull like Lismore, some islands around the west coast, Argyll, like the mainland, and also some mainland sites. Some of these it's not been seen at for a very long time, as we'll find out. But there's a big gap between the North Argyll sites and the South Argyll sites at the moment. This is taken from the GBEF website, and it's a map of its European range. Some of these dots are probably slightly dodgy, so I'm not really sure the moth's ever been recorded in the northwest of England or on the south coast of England. But certainly the west coast of Scotland and the west coast of Ireland records are correct. And these populations of the moth are a long, long, long way from the rest of the European population. They have been separated for almost certainly thousands of years now, and that makes them quite special and quite distinct. The population that occurs in Scotland is known as the subspecies I won't be able to pronounce it correctly, but Caledoniensis, and it's separate from all other populations. That subspecies is not known from anywhere else. In particular, I'm going to focus what I'm going to talk about on these Argyll sites here. So these are the sites on the Argyll mainland. Each dot represents a colony, roughly, and each number is the last year the moth was seen there. So a bit of further background on the moth. The caterpillar of the moth only feeds on wild thyme. I've just found out recently that in Europe or in Germany, this is called the wild thyme burnet or the thyme burnet, which makes a lot of sense. It can be seen from early June to July on the wing. So that's the time to go look for it. It may change by a couple of weeks either way, depending on how early or late the spring is. It seems to particularly affect the timing of the burnets. As I mentioned, it's got this really bumbling flight when it's sunny. When it's not sunny, it's quite often easily found, even in the rain sometimes, just sat around doing nothing, sitting on a bit of thyme or on a grass stalk like this in the photo. Obviously, they're not terribly worried about being predated for whatever reasons. Presumably, they don't look particularly appetizing with their colours to birds. So they are quite easily found if you want to go look for them. It doesn't have to be strong sunshine, although that does help. And the key thing is looking in the right places. So colonies tend to be in places with quite distinctive habitat, and that habitat is fairly steep south-facing ground that has basalt rocks underneath. So this is one of the kind of classic Argyll sites. You got steep south-facing slopes. You got a really short sward which favours the thyme. It's a well-grazed site with sheep. And yeah, you have the wild thyme growing across the rocks. And it's these rocks which seem to be important, particularly when there's bare rock around. That really seems to suit the moth. So that's the kind of characteristics of the site. Steep, south-facing, bare rock, lots of thyme. That's what the moth needs. And almost always it's at the coast. There's a few sites, as you can see on this map, if I just go back, where the moth is occurring a bit further inland. But these are the exception rather than the rule. And really in Scotland, the only inland sites we're actually aware of is these ones around Argyll. Well, moving back through. So some of the problems the moth face, and that we're hoping to find out more about the moth by carrying out these surveys, is to try and find out whether sites are actually under threat or not, or if the moth is actually doing okay. So one of the threats on Mull particularly is this. This is Cotoneaster, which can really just smother a site. Perhaps a slightly more common problem is this, which is bracken. So well-grazed sites with sheep tend to become suitable for bracken to invade, particularly with climate change, but also with nutrient enhancement through the sheep being there for many years, and they don't eat the bracken, so that helps it thrive. So this is a site that at one time was probably quite suitable for transparent burnet, but probably no longer is, because the chances of wild thyme doing well in that is very slim now that the bracken's completely taken over. So I wanted to mention really about one survey experience that I had this year, in the hope that I might inspire some of you to get out and look for this moth, and just to show what you can actually find. But back in the 1970s and 80s, there was a chap called Clifford Edwards, who I think he lived in Argyll, and he found transparent burnet at a number of locations, and he collected the moths and pinned them. And about 15 years ago, his collection came to light. And a chap called Andrew Masterman took quite an interest in this. And he was able to work out roughly where Clifford had found some of his moths. So one was for a hill just outside Oban. This is Oban. And this is the record for the hill called Druim Moor. It's like a long ridge which runs southwest out of Oban, opposite Kerrera. There's a mast on top of the ridge, and if you know Oban well, you'll probably recognise the hill. The ferry port is here, so we're talking literally 10-15 minute walk out of Oban. Andrew chased up some of Clifford's records, and he found a colony of transparent burnet on the hill, presumably, or perhaps the same one that Clifford had. And Andrew visited it a few times over a few years. About 7 or 8 years ago was his last visit. And he always located the colony around this little crag, which was just above some new housing on the outskirts of Oban. So this year I went to try and find that again, and Andrew had commented that he was a bit worried that the habitat wasn't being grazed anymore and that it might become unsuitable. So I was set out with the idea to see if the moth was still there and what conditions the habitat in. So I got to the spot where Andrew had recorded the moths on his visits, and this is what I found. So it wasn't overly promising. There was very little bare rock. There was a lot of moss, a lot of long grass. I couldn't find any wild thyme whatsoever. So immediately my heart kind of sank, and I thought, well, we might have lost this site for the moth. I knew there was some potential there might be other habitat on the ridge, so I walked along it, and I quite quickly came to this area where there was some relatively suitable looking habitat on south east facing slopes. There was some bare rock amongst the bracken. So I checked each of these bits out, and it wasn't too long before I found a transparent burnet. I found one or two, so not big numbers, but well, I wasn't expecting to find big numbers on that bit of habitat. It wasn't a lot of it, but it was really good to find that the moth was still there, so success. However, that's when the day got really quite exciting. I walked along to this little promontory, which was high above the road, and it doesn't look that steep in the photo, but it was very, very steep. So I got to the top of here, and it was quite cloudy, but it was warm. I looked down at my feet, and in the long grass, there was just transparent burnets everywhere, crawling up the grass stems all around me. I scrambled down a little bit onto this. I was in the most wonderful flower-rich habitat. My photos did not do it justice. There was thyme and stonecrop everywhere. It was just, yeah, one of those wonderful moments when you're in nature and you discover something just lovely. And there was just transparent burnets everywhere. I have to be very careful not to stand on them. It was mating pairs. They were just crawling around the thyme. It was just, yeah, a lovely experience and a lovely place to find. And it didn't stop there. So that was where I first found the transparent burnet. And then over the next couple of hours, I found them at all of these locations. And I eventually walked back down to the road at this point and then headed back. Some of these sites were right by the road. So it just goes to show you, this is just outside Oban, a 10-15 minute walk. How long's the moth been there and not been spotted by anybody? A really distinctive, large moth, easy to identify. Yet, you know, nobody's ever spotted it there, apart from maybe Clifford Edwards back in the 1970s and 80s. So yeah, amazing. And there's still quite a large chunk of the hill that I haven't surveyed, so there's possibly more transparent burnets there waiting to be found. It's clearly quite a strong colony, and whilst the hillside isn't being grazed anymore, I think there's enough steep ground and bare rock that I'm sure the moths are going to survive just fine there for the foreseeable future. So far within the Species on the Edge project, we've had records come in from all of the sites in blue, and some of these are quite good records. So I think Glyn Edwards went to the Isle of Seal, and he found a moth there just by Easdale village, which was the first record from Seal since I think 1978. So I think that was last year. So that was a great find. There was one came from Arden Talon Point, which was the first record of the moth there since 1988. And this one in particular is really quite intriguing. So if anyone knows the Oban area, you might know of a site called the Black Locks. And this is quite a well-known site for rare dragonfly species. There's a really nice assemblage of dragonflies there. Goodness knows how many entomologists have walked to the Black Locks to look for dragonflies over the years. But 3 years ago, Ian Leach went there, and he, whilst looking for dragonflies, I presume, turned round and found transparent burnets on the other side of the track from the locks, just on banks with thyme. I went back a few weeks later after Ian told me where it was, and misinterpreting Ian's instructions, I went somewhere slightly different, but also found the moth. So there's clearly the moth is present at 2 or 3 locations at the Black Locks. So given how many people visit there looking for insects, I find it hard to believe that this isn't a new colonization. Surely someone would have spotted the moth there before. So if that's a new colonization, it perhaps raises hopes that the moth is doing quite well in Argyll, and that there's maybe a lot more sites to find as well. So yeah, if you would like to get involved with transparent burnet surveys, you would be most welcome either on the islands or on Argyll. Through the Species on the Edge project, we hope to continue to survey these sites and gain more information about how well the moth is doing there. So that survey is very simple. All we really ask is for you to go and look for the moth, and if you find the moth, just to tell us a little bit about what condition the habitat's in. Even just some photos are really useful to tell whether there's anything we need to worry about. And if there are sites where there might be some issues, then we can send it on to Liz Peel, our project officer working on Species on the Edge, and hopefully we could try and improve some of those sites to tackle some of the issues. So yeah, if you would like to get involved with surveys, please do get in contact with Liz Peel at that address there. And that's it from me. So thank you very much for listening.
And now we're going to talk about Highland Perthshire. So this is some of the work that I've been doing over the past year and a bit of butterfly conservation, but some of you might have first met me when I was doing work in urban areas in Glasgow and Edinburgh and things. So I came to butterfly conservation coming up 9 years ago now, working on urban projects, but then I moved over to some of the more rare species work more recently. And so one of the landscapes that I'm responsible for is Highland Perthshire. It's 49,000 hectares of incredible, beautiful land. But as you can imagine, it's a kind of a daunting size of a landscape too. So it also, you can see it just kind of circled on the map there, and also a closer map showing some of the places you might recognise. Around Pitlochry, Blurathel and Loch Tummel and Loch Rannoch, but I've also kind of extended it to include Glenlyon as well because I live in Glenlyon, but also the species that we're interested in are in Glenlyon, so why not? It's still in Highland Perthshire. So. And our priority species in this landscape are the pearl border. I'll start with the butterflies first. 3 butterflies, pearl border fritillary, northern brown argus and the large heath butterfly. Then out of the moths, we have a large number of macro moth species. The one I'll be talking about today is the Kentish glory moth. And then we also have the silver shade, Iana argentana, which is only found in and around Glentilt. And Holly, who's in the audience today, was the person who found these eggs last year, the only person to ever find them in the wild. So well done, Holly, for finding those. But as you might imagine, with such a large landscape, you've got many different habitats within it. And this can be why there's such diversity as well. So obviously you've got mountains and hillsides, you got ancient woodland, flower-rich grassland, you have commercial forestry, all of which you can see in the map here. All of these are in this small location. Some very large estates, which sometimes makes working with landowners quite easy because one person can own a huge area, so you're only dealing with one person then. There's also rewilding. I've put it in inverted commas just to highlight the fact that there's no one version of rewilding. There's many different versions of it, of what rewilding can look like. There's intensive agriculture, there's hill farming. And so as you can see, there's a wide diversity of different habitats here. The reason I've highlighted Tumble Bridge here is because within it, you can find the 3 priority species I'm going to talk about today. So I've seen Kentish glory there. Pearl border fritillary can be found in the way leaves among the commercial forestry, and you also get roadsides with common rock rose on it where northern brown Argus has been recorded before as well. So in this one small area, you've got 3 of our different priority species, probably each within a couple of 100 meters of one another, even overlapping sometimes. So it's this is often why we kind of pick these landscapes, because we can do a lot of hopefully good work in a smaller place. So why Highland Perthshire? This is one of the pictures from my fieldwork this year, but just to say, so I came into this post in June 2023. I'm responsible for 6 landscapes across Scotland. So you might have seen me in Tentsmuir. I've also been out Loch Harbour, I've been in Loch Catron, I do Highland Perthshire, I do some of Ayrshire. So why have I focused only upon Highland Perthshire for this? Well, first of all, butterfly conservation has done very little work here in the past. We've maybe done some work with the estates, like Atholl estates, but we haven't really done much more work with farmers and other people in the area. As I mentioned, there's a presence of many priority species close to one another, and there's good links to develop there. I've been living here, but not actually doing my work here until recently. But I've been living on and off there for about 10 years, but most of that time I was doing some of the urban work. So now I've developed these links and now I actually have time to start working on them. And I live here as well. So this is my dog, Bonnie, but this is one of our walks, and I live at the bottom, way down in the valley down there. And it helps to get to know people around the place, but also when you have 5 minutes of sunshine and it's a pearl border fritillary season, you know that you can just run out and hopefully find them at potential new sites. So it helps to have somewhere close by. And I've made this little video just to say that I know what this place is like in the season. So this is the high walk that I go to, but you can see it changing through the season. So I'm kind of there all year round. I know what wild animals come in. I know where there's deer tracks that make land for pearl border fritillary. And I think it's just a good opportunity to make the place a bit better for butterflies and moths. This is my favorite, when the rowan tree turns red like that. This time of year it gets kind of misty and all the leaves come off the trees and it gets like this and dark and gloomy. But then obviously lots of snow as well. So we get minus 15 most years, kind of weather like that, and it can be quite extreme. Summer can be quite short, and the pearl border fritillary season is about 2.5 to 3 weeks long in this landscape. And I've been working on projects and developing projects. And projects can be like buses. So first of all, we've applied for and we received the Scottish Government's Nature Restoration Fund. We had £22,000 through the NRF to conduct survey work for the species and to work with land managers to make their land better for butterflies and moths. We also got some funding from the SSE Griffin Community Wind Farm Fund. This is around some public engagement work I've been doing. And we also got a grant for working on land for northern brown Argus as well. So I'll be talking about all of these today. But yeah, you kind of start off the year with no money, and then all of a sudden the 3 buses come at once and you're left very, very busy, but good busy, I hope. So starting off with the NRF, this is mostly around conducting surveys of existing sites and potential new sites for pearl border fritillary, northern brown Argus and Kentish glory. We also assessed the habitat and just looked at what kind of condition it was in and made management plans. So I'll be doing that right now. I'll be developing these management plans where we want to work with landowners to say over the next 10 years, how can you make your land better for these species? And that's the really important part of the work. But we've also been working with some very large partners in the area, including Forestry and Land Scotland, one of the biggest landowners in this landscape, Atholl Estates, Highland Perthshire Community Land Trust, Scottish Wildlife Trust, and Perth and Kinross Council. So projects like this allow us to draw lots of partners together, and that's the whole point of them. So pearl border fritillary, you might have heard me many times just saying pearl border fritillary is my favorite butterfly. It's the butterfly that got me into butterflies after chasing it for 3 very hot, dry days at the slopes of Ben Lawers when I was volunteering with the National Trust up there. And then finally, at the end of those 3 hot days, we found the pearl border fritillary. So I've been hooked ever since then. And that was before I started with butterfly conservation. But in this landscape, it's only found on sunny, bracken-covered hillsides, often with shelter nearby from woodland. So this is, I think of it as being a woodland edge or a woodland glade species, because I very rarely find it out on the open hill. The adults fly from mid-May until early June, and the caterpillars of this species eat common dog violets. They feed on those all summer. You can see the little caterpillar there. They common dog violets all summer, and then they overwinter among the vegetation. Then they come out the following year, usually around March, and they'll bask upon the dead bracken, and that will heat their bodies up and allow them to digest their food. And that's because bracken can be over 20 degrees Celsius warmer than the grass right beside it. So the bracken is a really important part of the life cycle of the species, in Highland Perthshire at least. This is a map of the species. So the UK trend is one of the worst that we have. It's a 88% decline in distribution since 1976. And so I'll just, as you can see, most of the English and Welsh sites have been lost. It's kind of holding on in a few places there. But we reckon that in Scotland, the losses haven't been as bad, and it might actually be spreading in some of the landscapes too, possibly because of climate change, allowing it to exploit more places. And then this is just a map, really. So the blue circles and the blue crosses show you places where it used to be found, where it isn't found anymore. And so that just gives you a bit of a scale of where it's disappeared from in Scotland. It's not quite as bad as it is in England and Wales. And in this landscape, this is roughly what it looks like. So what we decided to do was basically map the whole landscape. These are all the colonies that we knew of going back, until the 1800s. These are all the colonies that have ever been recorded of pearl border fritillary here. And we tend to think of them as linking up in some ways, like Dave was describing earlier for the Marsh fritillary. The species tend to have these networks that they use and that they can move around. And in Highland Perthshire, you have mountains in the ways, oftentimes, or lochs and things like that. So there might be certain reasons why they can't access other areas. So over the past number of years, including this year through the NRF fund that we got, our staff, including me, and some volunteers have been targeting pearl border fritillary sites to see if they're still there. Because it's all well and good having a map like this, but if this butterfly is not even found in these places anymore, then it's kind of redundant. So we need to really get our data up to date. So we targeted 45 current or previous sites, and we reckon around 30 of those have been visited in the last 2 to 3 years. And I'll talk about why some of them haven't been visited over recent times. We also asked volunteers to take photographs and make reports of the habitat. So when we go along, we want to see, okay, if the butterfly is not here this time, why is it not here anymore? Is there too much bracken? Not enough bracken anymore? Are there trees planted on the site, which does happen, and things like that. So we really want to get a picture of what's happened to the butterfly in this landscape. So they're also looking for threats. And one of the difficult things about pearl border fritillary, it's all well and good saying 45 sites, that's easy. One of my volunteers, Philippa, is here today. Philippa has been so dedicated to the species, and you really do have to be dedicated to pearl border fritillary. It flies for such a short time, and its flight season also overlaps with the small pearl border fritillary by about at least a week or so. So you can be recording pearl border fritillaries on a site one week, and you go the following week and it's all small pearl bordered, and they look almost identical until you get a good photograph of them and things. So it really requires dedication. Added to that the sites are often difficult to access. It means that we can't just have everybody turning up and looking for fritillaries. People really need to know what they're looking for and know how to get across the land. And Philippa's been doing that. So these are some of Philippa's reports. So I think this actually might have been a site where you didn't find them, Philippa. But so she was taking photographs of, the bracken cover, looking for bugle and violets there. And you can see the violets among the bracken. And I like your note there too, Philippa. Violets aplenty. I thought that was a really nice touch. Because it gives you an idea, of just that there's plenty of violets, and we don't sometimes always know why the butterfly isn't there anymore. But these surveys can help. And also, I would probably visit that site again next year just to check, just in case you missed them. And so the results from the recent years, so of these 45 sites or so, if you look at the blue and the yellow marks there, you'll see that they've been found on at least half of sites that were surveyed, or no, at least half of the sites in total. So I think that was an okay result. There were 20% of sites where it wasn't found, and we reckon that it's definitely not there anymore. This is because these surveys were done at the right time of year in good weather, and the habitat just looks wrong. So I feel those 20% is probably not going to be there anymore. And then some of the threats that were identified were things like forestry coming onto them, or build-up of bracken and loss of flora. So there's a good amount of bracken, but they're kind of Goldilocks butterflies. Not enough, it's just not good enough for them, but too much, the ground flora just gets choked out. So they need that kind of medium level of bracken. But the 32% of sites which weren't visited, I'm interested in those. And I put in brackets here in good weather, because in 2024, I started off with such hopes this year of getting out every single day. You know, so 3 weeks of flight season, you got 21 days of potential pearl border fritillary. I had 4 days this year where I was able to see pearl border fritillary in this landscape because it was so cold and overcast most of the time. If it's a warm day, but it's not sunny, you might still see them. Or if it's cold but sunny, you might see them. But if it's overcast and cold, which it was for much of June and the end of May, you're really not going to see this butterfly. But really, the butterfly doesn't fly unless it's good conditions. So I reckon, based on reports we have of these sites, that the butterfly could still be there, and it's at most of these sites, and it's worth visiting them again next year. So, Philippa, hope you're up for that. And anybody else who wants to help with it too. So overall, I reckon that it could still be at 2/3 of the sites in this area, but you'll also notice that some of the sites are new. So I have been finding it at new sites as well we didn't know about. So we can have a closer look at some of that. So this is near where I live. So in, I think 2020, I first discovered it just near the house. I was walking along one day, saw it on the roadside. So it couldn't have been easier. I wasn't even looking for it. It wasn't known to be in this part of Glen Lyon. I just happened to see it. Then I found some further up the burn and further up after that. Then the year after that, near the wee tea room at Bridge of Balgie, literally at the tea room at Bridge of Balgie, you can find it right beside there. So I found it there one morning when I was out running, and then I found it further along the glen. And all these sites you can see going up the hill are places where I found the butterfly just in the past few years. Very, very good numbers on the hillside above the tea room at Bridge of Balgie. So it's a great site for pearl border fritillary, even found at height. So it's up there to about 400 meters or so, the 400-meter contour line. You can still see the butterfly quite high up because of the woodland around, which is sheltering it, keeping it quite warm. So interesting things like that. And then this year, in 5 minutes of sunshine, so this is just looking from my garden here, and I was always kind of looking at that forestry in the hillside thinking, no, there's nothing there. But again, it was one of those days where I hadn't seen any butterflies for a while. And then the sun came out, so I ran across the field and I thought I better run up there and see what's there. And I found pearl border fritillary on both sides of the forestry there, and I found more than one. So the fact that I saw 3 of them means it's not just a wandering male coming in, they're breeding at that site. So I reckon there's more potential sites out there to be found that maybe we just haven't looked for yet. And this is kind of just a quick video. This is a chest height really, walking through whale leaves on hot days. One of the few hot days we had this year. These horrible whale leaf flies, I just call them whale leaf flies. They follow you all day through the whale leaves. But I did find decent colonies of the pearl border fritillary here. But then of course you end up with your boots full of bracken, ticks and things as well. Rip your trousers, getting over deer fences. Anyone who does field work will recognize photos like this. But then what do? Like you're only halfway through your day and your trousers have been ripped open. And you're kind of, it's one thing being exposed like that, but then all the ticks and things that can crawl in there, and you think, do I call it a day? Yeah, so all these things, but it's worth it when you find, again, this is from a news site for pearl border fritillary that I found this year. And coming on to the northern brown Argus then, so this species is found in flower-rich grasslands, in uplands and lowlands. Caterpillars feed upon common rock rose, and there's as Apithanny mentioned earlier, for the borders, it's declined very rapidly down there. And there's been a 56% decline in the UK distribution since 1990. You can look for the adults or search for the eggs on plants for 2 to 3 months. This was my saving grace this summer because it wasn't great for northern brown Argus either. It really didn't get sunny in Highland Perthshire until September. You know, it really stayed quite cool all year. And this is what the distribution of this species looks like in this landscape. You can see it's a lot wider distributed, and some of the colonies are very close to one another, so they're probably interbreeding and quite well connected. So almost all of these have been checked now, and before I go on to tell you what we found. Yes, UK's coolest summer since 2015. That really mucks up your year when you're doing field work. But thank goodness for eggs. So these eggs will stay plastered onto the plants, so the butterfly kind of sticks them on to the common rock rose, and they're quite easy to find. And even when the caterpillar has hatched, you can still look for the butterfly that way. And so I reckon that the species is still found at about 90% of the sites we've surveyed, because really because we can confirm that it's there by using the egg method. But we also discovered it at several new sites too, and extended some known colonies. So this is the kind of map that I would start out with. This is the Sheer Glass Quarry. If you're going up the A9, and the Blair Athol is on the north side of the river there, this is on the south side. You see the big massive quarry hanging out of the hill. I always wondered what was up there. And so I found out, it's a very, very steep walk up to the site, which is maybe why people don't go that often. I had one red dot, which kind of signified the whole area. And I was asked, my task was to see where the habitat is here. So what I was able to do then was all the yellow dots show common rock rose, and all the red dots show northern brown Argus. So you can see it's very well distributed across this whole site. And where most of the common rock rose is clustered there, that was just wall to wall common rock rose. It was pure, it was like a carpet of common rock rose. The butterfly was found on all four sides of the hill there, even in a really exposed condition. So that's at about 350 meters or so. The butterfly was just fine up there. I had no chance of finding the adults, but I was able to look for the eggs. So that's at least 5 acres of habitat, and now it's properly mapped. I reckon then from these surveys that most of the hillside colonies are probably still present. The butterfly is still there. Not all of them are in great condition, but at least the butterfly is still around. Whereas I reckon the lowland colonies are doing, they're a bit more vulnerable to things like agricultural intensification. So some sites have been lost to things like overgrazing, bracken encroachment, and scrub. So here's a site. There's a little, in the circle there, you can just see a little yellow flower of common rock rose. So bracken is becoming a bigger problem, even though we need it for the for the Pearl Border Fritillary. The Pearl Border Fritillary site that I showed you earlier, that's close to, that I saw from my garden, you can see the little bit of forestry at the side there. That's where that is. So the Pearl Border Fritillary needs the bracken, but the northern brown Argus needs no bracken because it needs more open land. So it's one of these conundrums where you're trying to work out what's best for butterflies and moths. But now it is, so because we have these results, we can work with landowners to advise them, first, that the species is there. Please don't plant any trees on the colony. You can manage the grazing, and there can be opportunities for active management, so things like scrub control to help them. But we're also helping landowners with funding applications, so they can apply to the Nature Restoration Fund themselves, and we can help those applications too. And so one day I received this email. So I had met this man, Giles, the day before to show him the northern brown Argus at one site at Straloch near Pitlochry. And he sent me that email the day after. Look what I found in our meadow, northern brown Argus. He had it there all along, completely new site for the species. He just thought he had a nice meadow, and look what was in it. And I went about a week after that and found more sites for the butterfly on his land. So again, they're out there to be found. And again, another landowner, this is up at Glassy Farm. He sent me a better picture than this then, is this rock rose. And I said, yeah, I'll come up and see what's there. And it was plastered in common rock eggs. So you can see there's sites like this, which now there's only about 5 plants of common rock rose there. I did a survey and couldn't find any more, but now this landowner has went and bought a load of rock rose seed himself, and he has lots of diggers and things, so he's just making scrapes and going to sew them all full of rock rose for this butterfly. So it shows you the importance of doing this landowner engagement work. But then on the flip side of that, though, is this is a deer fence, one of the best deer fences I've ever seen. Very well made, very long. And it prevents, it's keeping the livestock out. So a lot of the stock has been taken off this site. And you can see a tree planted there and common rock rose beside it. We know northern brown Argus is found at this site. So what will the future of that be? Now, below the fence, the rock rose might be fine, it might be fine for a while, but all grazers have been taken off. So over time, sites like that might degrade for the species. And then the opposite problem here, this could do with some fencing. So this was a lovely limestone pavement, the beautiful kind of stuff you kind of read about in books, all these grikes and all this lovely limestone flora. This was the height of summer, and that was the only rock rose flower I could find at it. It was chewed down to the ground because some farmers' sheep keep breaking in and eating everything. So we need to work with that farmer to get them a better fence to keep the sheep out. And then coming on to the last species then is the Kentish glory. This moth is extinct in England now. So besides, its name Kentish doesn't really apply anymore, but it is still glorious. So there are 4 main population centres. You can see them on the map there. And the thing about the Kentish glory is it requires an ephemeral habitat, which are youngish birch trees about less than about 1.6 metres tall. So similar to the Marsh Fritillary, which Dave mentioned, they're quite heavy. When they first emerge, they're full of eggs. So the females can't fly to the top of a big birch tree. They need these little birch trees that they can fly around and lay their eggs upon. So So on the map here, all the red dots show where the Kentish glory was found before 2000, and the yellow dots show it since 2000. You might notice that the kind of northern colonies there seem to be doing quite well. They're still found over a wide area. But in Highland Perthshire, they're all found. It's only been seen in a very small area around Tummel Bridge since the year 2000, and that's it. We have tried. We tried this year, but we really need to try harder next year, because when I was out in 2018, we had a pheromone lure. So these lures smell like the female of the species. You open the lure and then the males will fly to you. And so in 2018, when I first started with butterfly conservation, I was given some of these lures and told to go out and round Rannoch and look for this moth, just open it and see what happens. And this is what happened. So that's a Kentish glory on my leg there. And that's because the lures have been kept in my pocket. So, and obviously it had leaked a little bit or something. But that was one of several I found that day. They were over a decent area. I think I tried 4 different 1K squares and they were in every one of them, or maybe it was 100-meter squares. But anyway, it's a easy enough thing to do. So I thought, well, try it this year at exactly the same time of year and in good weather. But this year we found no Kentish glory at all. There were some light trappers out around the same time too. Didn't get any Kentish glory in their light traps. I tried exactly the same spots where I went to during this 2018 survey and didn't find any. So I am really quite worried about Kentish glory in Highland Perthshire. So this is the one I'm most concerned about, especially because the females are heavy and don't fly far. So if they become extinct in this landscape, there's very little chance of them coming back. So I want to say all hands on deck for the 2025 survey season. Everybody's invited to come and help me with that. Now there's other species in Highland Perthshire, so we don't have time to work on them all or to talk about them all today. So I found large red-belted clearing around Tummel Bridge this year. Again, 10 minutes of sunshine was enough to bring it out using a pheromone lure. I also did some searches and trapping for heath rivulet and yellow-ringed carpet. People describe these as easily disturbed by day. Tom says you can walk along with like your walking stick and hit rocks and they'll fly up and things like that on a sunny day. Well, good luck getting that, because that doesn't work if it's 5 degrees Celsius, cloudy and windy, which is really what it was for much of the mountainous sites this summer. But then Astralic Estate, it's one of those really rare good news stories. So you can count at least 2 northern barn Argus there, and fritillaries and ringlet and thing. The ground was just carpeted in butterflies. It was really hard to move without stepping on a butterfly. And we received a grant to work there. It's one of the best sites for northern barn Argus. And through that work, I was able to then train new volunteers and get them engaged. Then coming on to the final project, the SSE Community Fund. This is based around Aberfeldy, Kenmore, Grantley and Weem. I've been running moth mornings, so members of the public come along and learn about moths. But the photo on the right-hand side there, those 2 people had northern barn Argus on their land and didn't realise it. So I met them at the moth morning and then we kept in touch. And then I went and found northern barn Argus at their land. So events like this for the general public can also bring in landowners, which then you can kind of use those contacts too. But also you can meet with volunteers who will help you on your surveys and carry out work in future. We're also doing Pearl Border Fritillary work through that and making new contacts around there. So coming up towards the end, so Philippa, you said, am I just surveying the disappearance of butterflies? And I thought, well, if I was a surveyor like Philippa going out and not finding them at some sites, I'd be really despondent. But hopefully that's not the case. I think that their butterflies are still at many of the sites they used to be found at. There's hope in that they're being found at other sites too. But these landowner connections we're making are really important, because now we can try to influence the management and kind of secure the future for these species. My priority for 2025 will be to finish those fritillary surveys and get out there and look for the Pearl Border fritillaries at more sites and really try to find out what's happening with Kentish glory in this landscape. I'm not ready to give up on it yet, and I think we all need to kind of really throw everything we have at the survey season in 2025. Just to say, your support is vital, either through volunteer work, but even through your membership and supporting butterfly conservation, because all of those projects I mentioned, none of them were fully funded. All of them needed things like East Scotland branch chipped in a bit of money to make the kind of final amount, which then allows us to run these projects. So your support through your membership and donations and things like that can actually unlock big projects like this. So thank you very much for that support. And thank you very much to everybody mentioned on the screen there, to all those funders, and just a special shout out to Philippa Swan, who's in the audience, and Chris Stamp, who's there as well, for helping with the surveys for these species. And those are my next work dates that I'm out if anybody wants to come along and help on a day out in Highland, Perthshire. Okay, that's me. Thanks very much.
Anthony, we're used to hearing about your urban work, so that was really nice to hear about your new conservation role. Have you found it much more difficult recruiting volunteers than in your urban projects? I assume so.
Yeah, if you look at the population density, Highland Perthshire has one of the lowest population densities in the whole of the UK. Just there are many people spread out over a very, very large area. So, you know, you can have millions of people living in Edinburgh and Glasgow and things, whereas your potential pool of volunteers is spread out over a very large area in that landscape.
Looks like you had quite a few people come to
Yeah, well, we had free catering that day through that project. Yeah, so we had, so I told people they could come along, they get a cup of tea and they get buns and things like that too from Highland Safaris things. So yeah, it was a really, really nice day out, and that was the biggest one actually. So I think that the tea and buns did it. Yeah. Yeah, and I looked at the old records. So there's journals. I think Mark Cubitt sent me some of the journals from before about people who looked at them in the past and reared them from caterpillars, and they were from young alder. So I think it could be associated with young alder there. I think that's a good it's a good theory, and I think we should be looking in both areas for it in future. I mean, when I found them in the past, it was mostly around birch woods, which made me think, well, I can just keep looking in birch. There wasn't much alder at all nearby. Now, it might have been that day that the wind was blowing towards a patch of young alder or something, you know, maybe where they were perhaps distributed more, and maybe they've just followed the lure into the birch. So I think, yeah, we should be looking at that as well. And that's why really we need more people out on the ground next year during the flight season over about 3 weeks to target these different areas. And really, that's why I said see what's going on with Kentish glory in this landscape, because I think it's there's a lot more to be discovered.
Just a question about, it seems like the best thing is for a variation in habitats. You don't want too much bracken, just going back to the Fritillary. You don't want too much bracken, you need a bit of rock rose, you like a bit of cover from trees. What natural, obviously the fencing off, but is there any natural processes that help keep that variation apart from reintroducing wolves? But I'm not sure.
Yeah, some of the wild herbivores that I see would do that, you know, especially the tracks through woods and things. You know, you can see. I was out the other morning to the Pearl Border Fritillary site near Bridgerbalgie. There were deer walking through there at night and in the morning. So obviously they're breaking, their hooves are breaking the bracken up and making just enough room for the violets and things to come out. Possibly with the rock rose, it might be on more scree. That might be its more natural habitat, might be riverbanks and scree and disturbed habitats like that. In Glen Lyon, we get a lot of landslips every year, so it could be natural processes like that, which are, you know, which have maintained it in the past. Okay, that's me.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the theme of volunteer work in today's gathering. And next up, we have Mark Cubitt, who you'll remember is the recipient of one of our volunteer awards. And he's going to be talking about search for the Talisker Burnet.
Yes, I'm really poaching out of my territory of County Moth across the Lothians. So going to Skye was quite a nice thing to do. Quite enjoy myself up there. Cool, thank you very much. So this is Talisker Bay, home of the Talisker Burnet, its discovery, and still the place where its homeland is. So why was I there? The Butterfly Conservation are responsible for one of the projects that they're responsible for under Species on the Edge is this herb-rich pastures habitat, and as well as the Marsh Fritillary we already heard about. There's these 4 rare burnets are part of that and I've been asked to have a look at the Talisker Burnet, and also to some degree the transparent Burnet as well. Now, I must say, rather like Anthony was saying, it doesn't often look like this. And I think the ratio of days of good weather that you're getting, Anthony, is about the same as mine. I was there for 10 days and got 1 day of good sunshine until mid-afternoon at least, and the other day sunny spells, and the rest of it was rather different, I think, to be fair to say. So the Talisker Burnet is a subspecies of the narrow-bordered 5-spot Burnet, and it was discovered at this site in Skye in 1961, and that's when it was named as a subspecies. The other dots you can see on the map are spread up from further south. Is actually widespread across Europe, and it has initially turned up in 1993 in Cubitt. Didn't really spread from there, as you can see from the map. It actually spread up the east coast through Berkshire and East Lothian into the borders, the central belt, into Fife more recently, and then right across to the west coast. So you can see a couple of dots there in Ayrshire, and there were 500 seen at Hunston Power Station area this year. So one interesting question is, how fast will it spread up the west coast and onto Skye? Don't know. We'll have to see that. As a species, its food plant is the meadow vetchling. Unlike the 6-spot Burnet, which feeds on bird's foot trefoil, meadow vetchling is a plant that can survive with a higher sward length of grasses and so on around it. So it gets in slightly different habitats to the 6-spot Burnet, but requiring a higher sward length means it's quite vulnerable to grazing and so on as well. So that's something to be aware of, and we'll touch on that as we talk through. So the other species I mentioned was the transparent Burnet, which David didn't get a chance to talk about. So I'll talk about a wee bit about that. So these, so it's the only one of our Burnets that feed on thyme, and thyme as a plant doesn't like a high sward length. It quite likes grazing and rocky ground and this kind of stuff. So again, you get them in quite different habitats. And some of the habitats that I was looking at were quite different, to have quite a variety of habitat within them. So there were some places where you could get the moth together. And certainly when looking for the adult moths, they both like nectaring, so they'll fly away from their food plants potentially, and so you might see them elsewhere. So on the left-hand map, you can see where I was in Skye. So it's just on that set of peninsulas there on the west coast of Skye. And the red dots on this side, that's not what I meant to do. That's the dot. Oh, here we go. You're right. So if it's a tiny dot, isn't it? So Talisker Bay North. So that photograph was taken from about here, out west. You don't actually find them in the bay itself, but on the below the cliffs to the north, and then the cliffs down to the south as well. And then these other sites at Loch Eynaut, Loch Brittle, and the Surrey Sound, these are quite different habitats, and I'll show you a couple of pictures to show you what they look like. They are not the same tall cliffs, with one exception that we'll talk about. So we're up there for 10 days. First afternoon, I thought I'd try and see what the habitat looked like. So you can see not the brightest day, quite dreich, and I was standing in the middle of the beach, and just walked to have a look on this little area here, and despite it being dreich, there was clearly nothing flying around, but did manage to find a transparent Burnet I see on the left-hand side there. One of my Talisker Burnets here, and in the middle, the pupal case on some meadow vetchling. So you can see it's yellow flower, and the meadow vetchling has got little tendrils and so on, which allow it to climb up other vegetation, so it can survive quite well in those habitats. Next morning. This is more like David's weather, I think. So I did actually video this, and the trees were wafting backwards and forwards about a metre or so. So it wasn't, not, it wasn't like that all the time. So a little bit later in the day, we took a walk up to the cliffs just to the south of Talisker Bay. Slightly breezy. It wasn't raining at this moment. So from here, actually, you can actually see the cliffs of north of Talisker Bay. The bay is just behind this plume of water rise rather than waterfall, maybe. And the habitat that we're looking at is this kind of habitat along the bottom of the cliff here. So the bit at the bottom here, you can see just looking vertically down in the cliff here. This is again the kind of habitat that we were looking for. This little peninsula here is quite challenging to get at, and I'll show you about some of the tidal effects that made some of the monitoring a wee bit challenging. So, looking at each of these different sites. So this was the sunny day, and there was a piece. So the survey where I was doing was following on for some work that had been done previously. So Nigel Bourne's the chief scientist at Butterfly Conservation, had done his PhD under Mark back in the early 90s, and this was his main study site. He had, as part of his study, he had divided this area here up into a number of areas. There's this little area here, which is called Area A, and that's largely disappeared through tidal erosion. So that wasn't a major part of what I was doing. So this is B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and K, with the areas along there. And all apart from areas J and K were accessible at all tides. J and K, there's a little rock promontory there, which you can't get around at high tide. But otherwise, it was quite readily accessible. And that's actually one of the key things I needed to understand from the project, was because although there were records on those where those red dots were, that didn't mean that you can get to them on foot. Well, people didn't actually know whether they can get to them on foot or not. So a key part, and which I have now done, is provide access information about when it is you need to go, which ones are tidal, which ones you need boats for. And I didn't have a boat. So while I was there, this was the day when I was going to do a moth survey, SOS to a habitat survey. So the work that I was involved in was there to to check what the habitat looked like now, try and compare it to what it looked like before, understand how much food plant there was there. Also, if the weather was right, let's do some counts of moths to find out how they compared. I also wondered, just to come back to this point about what's the best life cycle stage to get involved in. So also, I had the idea, well, if it's going to be Hebdreich weather, surely you can find some pupal cases. So I'd found one on the first day, so I thought that was promising. Turned out they're actually quite hard to find. Well, at least for me, anyway, I don't know. Nigel Bourne said that they're actually quite easy to find. So whether that says something about me or the moth population, not absolutely sure, to be honest. So those different site areas that I mentioned there. This is a table from the report I wrote. So and you can see the Talisker Burnet counts in the third column. The fourth column was Nigel's counts for the same areas, and then counts for the transparent and six-spot burnets as well. So you can see in the first site area, then only a handful of the Talisker burnets there. Whereas that was quite an important area. It's quite a large area across those four. So that so there's got quite a change there. And Nigel has suggested to me afterwards that actually, interestingly, the timing of emergence actually differed by a week or even 10 days from that very west-hand end of the H sites, H and K sites at the west end compared to the sites at the east, which is quite remarkable for, you know, quarter or half a mile of one another. So it could be that. I'm not quite sure, because some of the data suggests that the males seem to emerge about the same side. Maybe the females that actually emerged a bit later and therefore affected the life cycle. Areas H and I seem to be pretty similar. And then area J, I've got a big 0. And the reason for the big 0 is because that's now what it looks like. So so clearly in that intervening period, there has been some landslip, which has taken away. And Nigel was saying that actually this area was very heavily populated by the meadow vetchling, but now that's gone completely, and hence the moth too. Interestingly, this was about, you know, only one of a couple of areas where I found that there was significant landslip. So it does seem to be quite stable, which probably also means that the habitat is maturing over time. And I'll show you a point about that in a second. So this is area I. So this is one of the areas where I saw quite a few. And on the picture here, the pale colour grass, or the, you know, vegetation, is not too high. Had a lot of meadow vetchling. The darker areas, you know, can be meadowsweet or bracken, or hemp agrimony, as it was in this case. And when that gets too dense, that starts to stop the meadow vetchling being there and affecting the moths. So this is the back right at the very east end, area B, and you can see that the dark coloured vegetation is where it was quite deep, and the Talisker bets I did see were around the edges around here and up to the top. Hope you can see this dot. I can only just see it from here, so you could get better eyesight than I have. And up the top there was where it was seen, and in the centre there wasn't very much. And indeed, if you look at that, you can see there's a lot of meadowsweet and bracken and such like in there, and that's probably why there was less density there. If the timing of emergence hadn't quite worked in the same way. So that was Talisker Bay North. Talisker Bay South. So this was a picture that I took on that second day as well. You can just see the very edge of the waterfall. So I'm looking south here, and again you can see the habitat running along here. To be honest, this looked like fantastic habitat. You know, really enjoyed my time out there. There's a peninsula there, and if I look back at this picture here, where it goes to orange, that boundary between the red and the orange is that peninsula. I don't quite know, apart from by boat, how you get down onto that orange area there, but it's never been surveyed before. But I'd be very surprised if it wasn't quite similar to this habitat. The habitat looks remarkably similar. Getting there was more of a challenge, though. I mentioned when I was starting about tide. So this is about half tide, maybe a couple of hours after high tide on the one on the left, and this was maybe 3 hours after on the one on the right. So So I needed to get along this, and you can't tell how slippery it is from there, but I can tell you it was unbelievably slippery. And I was on all fours through various parts of this to try and get there. So you need to be fairly intrepid. But the other thing is, at half tide, you know how often tides come round. That gives you, 6 hours at most, 5 hours with a bit of contingency, and to walk from one end to the other takes getting on for an hour. So there's the opportunity to do a habitat survey and a moth survey at the same time, or even one of those in one period is quite challenging. So to find 2 days in a row when you can do that, make this an interesting task. So maybe this is a boat attempt, but there's absolutely no way that be able to better land a boat or a kayak with this amount of swell. Anyway, so it's a very interesting kind of place of survey, and slightly different to Glen Lyon perhaps. So on the left-hand side, you can see a quadrat. So part of the survey work I was doing was to estimate the amount of various different types of vegetation there. But what it does mean is that you look pretty closely at the ground, and we found some fantastic things. So I'd heard that dew moth had been recorded at North Talisker, hadn't been recorded at South Talisker where this one was before, I don't think. But that's a lovely thing to run into. Quite a few slow worms. I hadn't come across a time plume before. Sorry, not quite sure the scientific name is, Mark, you can tell me. And other things like grayling butterflies, lots and lots of yellow shell, just clouds of yellow shell. So there's some really nice habitat. However, not a single burnet. It was that kind of weather again. So I wasn't expecting them to be flying, but I didn't see any resting or hunkering down in the vegetation at all. Which is slightly, a bit surprising and a little bit worrying, but it could be that I did this fairly early on when I was there, so maybe I was a bit early. So the other site, so Loch Einort, Brittle and Sow Sound, these were quite different habitats. The left-hand side was quite typical, and in the I guess half a kilometre or so on that I'd taken to get as far as this, I've probably seen 30 or 40 transparent burnets, because it's nicely grazed, lots of time, lots of burnets flying around, and it was at least partly sunny. You can see on the left-hand picture it had a sunny period there. This was so there were two dots on the map. This site on the right-hand side was one of them. So this is an area where the sheep couldn't get in. So there was potentially good habitat here, but actually I only found a little bit of burstfoot trefoil and one small patch of meadow vetchling. There was a little valley just a couple of 100 meters to the east of this one, which had a bit more meadow vetchling in. So there was a little bit there, not huge amounts. On the walk in, I saw my only 6-spot burnet, and on the walk out, a couple of 100 meters to the right, in what looks like much better transparent burnet habitat, there's one really rubbish photograph, mobile phone photograph of a Talisker burnet, but that was the only one I saw away from the North Talisker site. This is a bit further along on there, so you can see again it's quite different habitat to the North Talisker. There was this one area of sort of semi-cliff, sort of 80-degree kind of angle. Now you can see quite a number of our little woolly friends here, and it's really extremely overgrazed here. You can see this area at the top right-hand corner here where the sheep had managed to get in and clear things really quite well. The bits where they couldn't get into was actually very mature. There were a lot of those tall plants that were going to be shading out things like vetchling and the birdsfoot trefoil. There were even some small trees and shrubs in there. I did manage to find one little patch of meadow vetchling in that top corner, just by the thing, but no sign of any burnets, unfortunately. Walking a little bit further along was the other bit that I was mentioning or inferred to a bit earlier on about the tall cliff faces. So sheep can definitely not get into this. Neither can I. So there was a subsequent survey to the one that Nigel Bourne had been involved in, done by SNH in 2006, and they took a boat onto this beach to be able to do this site. Looking down with a pair of binoculars, just down this area, down here, and also just hidden behind the rock face here, there were areas where there clearly was quite a lot of meadow vetchling. So that looked really nice. So I'll be much more confident about that, but that requires another trip to try and confirm the number of moths there. But it just shows the kind of variety of habitats there are in little pockets of habitat along some of these coasts that you can find these things. The Loch Brittle, sorry, the bit further towards the south here, there are two known sites there. This one was a known site from quite a long way back, 30, 40 years ago. There were none found there in 2006. And by the time I got there, it's pretty obvious why. There's lots of eardwellow and sallows and gorse and all this kind of stuff have really overtaken the site. So there's almost no chance of them being there anymore. Further along, the second site looks much nicer. Again, quite variable. Actually, on the walk out, there was quite a lot of meadow vetchling as well with potential sites. So this is a lot more promising. There were no sheep grazing on this area. There were a few cattle that have been grazing, and managed to find a pupal case there as well. And this is just a picture back from the North Talisker of a newly emerged Talisker Burnet. Just a wee taster. One of the things that I did do was just to look at some of the Burnet moths you get across Europe. And not all of them are black with red spots. I quite like our black with red spot ones, to be honest. These are a wee bit gaudy, but there's some quite entertaining ones. And as I say, there's quite a variety, and they feed on a variety of different food plants. So thought you might like to see a bit more colour at the end of the presentation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It was really interesting. Will you be going back next year with the boats? No?
Subject to negotiation and yeah.
We are running over. Should we do one quick question?
Yes. Well. So what I should have said. There's a chap, Neil Roberts, who was the person who found the site at the on the Surrey Sound, which I didn't get to do that, but he volunteered to take me out in the kayak.
Oh, brilliant.
So yeah.
We'll look forward to seeing the photo of that next time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, next up we have a photography talk, which is always very popular. So Mike Hay, photography course leader, would you like to make your way to the front? There you are.
Right, so just while Anthony is bringing up the presentation, I was one of those people on the picture of Highland safaris at the moth morning that Anthony did. So I've been photographing moths for about 3 months now. I run a business up about 10 miles east of where Anthony lives, and I'm very, very impressed at his optimism at how many days of sunshine we've actually had this summer. I don't think in County Bourne we've got quite that many, so obviously Glenlyon is the place to be. But as a result of that, I talked to Anthony. I then volunteered to host a moth morning in my garden. I built a light trap using the model that's on the Butterfly Conservation website. So I built one of those, trapped some moths, taking some photographs, and I did a macro photography lesson for the ladies and gentlemen that turned up. So all the photographs you'll see on the presentation here have been taken in the last 2 or 3 months, captured by me in the light trap in the area of County Bourne. So in that area, it's halfway between Aberfeldy and Glenlyon. So we'll come back to this at the end. So just have a little bit of a test on that. And it's right. I don't need to find it. We'll just go for forward. I'll keep it down to 1 button, which is nice and simple. So do you need expensive gear to be able to take nice photographs? Spoiler alert, no, you don't. It depends what you want to do with the photographs. So here's a selection of things here. So this is top of the range professional Canon mirrorless camera with the Canon macro lens. Costs you about £4,000 or so for the set to buy that, but it's capable of a whole lot more. Then you get the iPhone 14 Pro Max. That's now 2 years old, but it costs about £1,000 new, has a specialist macro function. The 14 was the first time that Apple brought in a special macro function on their cameras, which is really good. And then over here, we've got the iPhone 6, which I bought in 2014, and it's got a macro clip-on lens. And anyone that wants to come and see, I've got a stall upstairs afterwards. If you want to come and have a look at the macro lenses, try it on your phone. Some people did over lunchtime as well, and it gives you an opportunity to see what it's capable of. But there was a lady at the moth morning at Highland Safaris who Anthony was talking about a particular moth he wanted to capture in the trap, and he hadn't managed to get. And I said, "Oh, I got one a couple of days ago." So I showed the lady the photograph that I'd taken. She went, "Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, but you've got a great phone," because it was the iPhone 14. She said, "My phone's rubbish. I can't take decent photographs on that." So I thought, right, I'm going to take that as a bit of a challenge. So I picked 3 moths. Next time I managed to capture the moths, I picked 3. So here, got the white ermine. And one of those pictures was taken with the Canon R5 with the 100mm lens. One was taken the iPhone 14 Pro Max, and one was taken the iPhone 6 with the clip-on macro lens. And bearing in mind that it's just approaching tea break now, bit of audience participation is always good. So I want a show of hands of who thinks that the left-hand picture was the one taken with the lowest resolution. To give you an idea of resolution of pictures, if you know anything about that, just think of the numbers. Canon R5 gives you 45 megapixels. iPhone 14 gives you 24. The iPhone 6 gives you 8. Okay? So one of those is 45 megapixels and one of them is 8. So I want a show of hands of who thinks the left-hand one is the iPhone 6 with the clip-on macro. Okay, smattering there. Who thinks it's the middle one? All right, quite a few more there. Who thinks it's the right-hand one? Again, quite a few there. So there we go. Everyone got the middle one? You got it right. But it's hard to tell because it all depends on what you want to do with your photographs. So here's another one. Again, let's get a show of hands. Bottom left, who thinks that one was the iPhone 6 with the clip-on macro? Quite a lot of people there. Top one? One or two. And the right-hand one? Any don't knows? Any can't tells? Yeah, there's quite a few of those. And so there we go there. So we're getting in there. So there's the bottom left one here. Last one to go through on here. Let's go again. Another show of hands. Who thinks bottom left? No, a few, okay. Top middle one. Quite a lot there. And the bottom right? Not very many there. Well, that's the one that's caught you out because that one was the iPhone 6. So with the right photography, with a really low resolution camera, but with a nice lens to stick over the top of it, and they sell for somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds on Amazon. I'm sure other providers are available, but it's just nice and convenient when you live in Keltyburn. And so therefore you can get there and you can do that. And there are others, and you can come and have a look at them afterwards. So macro photography, general principles, not just about moths. I've only been doing moths for the last 2 or 3 months since I met Anthony. But general macro photography, patience, perseverance, and perspective, the 3 Ps. It's that with all photography, really. You've got to be patient. You've got to wait for the light. You've got to wait for other things. With moths, you've got to wait for them to sit still or hope they don't fly away. And that's where perseverance comes in. You know, perseverance with normal macro photography, if you pick a lovely little toadstool or a mushroom or a bit of fungi, and it's not quite right, I'll come back tomorrow, I'll persevere. With a moth, you can't do that because you come back in 5 seconds and it's gone. So you've got to persevere, and that usually means find another one and try and do better next time. But persevere, and you will get a great photograph in the end. Just keep going at it, because that's what makes it special. When you get that really good photograph, you go, yes, and you get that really good feeling. So some general principles on the right-hand side here. You know, if you've got a moving target, which is potentially the moth moving around, and if you're not in a stable position, then you're moving your camera, the chances of you actually getting it in focus reduces significantly. So get yourself into a nice stable position, support your hands. I'm ex-army, I spent 30 years in the Argyll and Southern Highlanders and then Royal Regiment Scotland. So I always refer things back to shooting a rifle because that's what I was taught how to do. And you get really steady hands, and it's exactly the same with a camera. And whatever that camera is, whether it's a DSLR, a mirrorless, or a smartphone, get yourself nice and stable. Have a ground sheet or a bin liner or something to sit on, because if you're worried about getting wet knees, a wet tummy, or wet something else, then you're not thinking about getting a nice stable camera, because you're concentrating, oh, it's wet, it's chilly, especially around Keltyburn. Move yourself instead of zooming. This particularly for smartphone photography. There's a real tendency, because you can pinch zoom, and we're all used to doing it. We bring up a photograph and we pinch to zoom in on the photograph. When you're taking that photograph, use the lenses that you've got. So I had a lady who came and saw me when I was upstairs and said he wasn't sure how to use the lenses for a distance. She had a 0.5, a 1, and a 3 on the camera there. And there are 3 different camera lenses on the back. Use the telephoto one that you've got on it. But also, once you get to that maximum resolution or that maximum telephoto lens, there's no point going any further, because all you're doing is increasing the size of the pixels. So you might as well take it at the ×3 with your telephoto and then crop it afterwards, because then you've got more in the picture. If you crop in, then you're just reducing the size. It's equivalent to cropping it. So instead, if you haven't got enough in the picture, move yourself forward closer to it, and it will fill the picture. If you've got too much, move yourself back. It's common sense, but you're surprised how many people don't actually think about that as they do. Decide how much you want in focus, particularly with DSLR mirrorless cameras, you can adjust how much you've got in focus there. Consider having a light on a mini little tripod that you can have to give yourself a bit more light. I've had people upstairs asking me about how to take in lower light, how to get the exposure right with dark and a lighter background. And a light might help you to sort that out. Changing the background can sort it out as well. And remember, you can edit in post-production. Even in your phone, all the phones come with a little bit of editing function in there, and it's worth doing. Playing with the highlights and the shadows, just make it look the way that it did. So the fastest way to get 117 really bad reviews on my Google Business Profile is to take too much longer into your tea break. So I'm going to rattle through some big composition rules just for Moth macro that you got here. First one is fill the frame. So there's an angle shades that I caught about a week and a half ago that's on there. Do you want that? There's nothing wrong. And none of these are right and wrong pictures. It depends on what you want to get out of it. Or do you want that? So it's different things. And some people might like that one. Some people might like that one. I tell all my students, the only person that matters when you take a photograph is you. Because one man's or woman's Monet is another one's Picasso. Some people like cubism, some people like the old masters, some people like weird things in the corner that gets made up. You know, it's all about, it's your opinion that matters. It depends what you want to do with it. Add some context. So this is a buff tip that I got. And I looked at it and thought, oh, did my identification, found out it's a buff tip, found out that they camouflage themselves by trying to look like twigs from beech trees. So I have a beech tree in the garden, so I nipped off and I went and got a bit of windfall from the beech tree, and I created that. So a bit of context to show it being camouflaged in there. Then I got a bit of that one, and I thought that looks good too. Then I got carried away and I did that one there from a bit of distance. And I thought it's about different things that you might want to do with your photograph. And it's about painting the picture about the camouflage. And after 30 years in infantry, I know a lot about camouflage. But these lot have got a lot to teach us about it as well. Consider the angle when you look at it. Do you want to take it from above? Do you want a picture in front? Do you want a picture side on? Same moth, 3 photographs, completely different. It all depends on what you want to get out of that photograph. What effect do you want? Do you want a nice scientific one of a large green emeralds here? Or do you want one front on that makes it look something out of an alien movie and sci-fi and really weird? You know, what are you trying to achieve with your photographs? What story are you trying to tell? Because photographs are about stories. They're about capturing memories. They're about telling that story to your audience. And consider scale. So there we have moth on the tree there, showing the branch in there, or you can go in close and you see this. One of the things you might want to think about having here, if you want to catch them in this environment or another place where you can put it down, is get an old beech nut casing, beech mast, because everyone knows what they are. It's natural. Everyone knows what size they are. Don't get a fir cone or something else, because fir cones can be that size or they can be that size. But beech nut casings, they're all about the same size, and you can place that down, a little bit of gentle artistry for your thing. And then when the moth goes against it, and especially if you're doing micros and you get them on there, then you'll see it in comparison with the beech nut casing. And everyone goes, oh, right, it is really small. Whereas actually, if you fill the frame with it and you've got no context with the scale, it's harder to do. So back to the beginning. That was a very quick rattle through. I will be upstairs for, I won't take any questions now, because you can come up and ask questions, and I think you're all gagging for a cup of tea. So how many moths can you see, and can you name them? And I'll leave you with that one. So there they are there. Okay.
Next up, we've got one of our very active volunteers in East Branch. Geoff Ballinger has been finding purple hairstreak sites by picking up windfall oak twigs in winter. Welcome, Geoff.
Thank you very much, Apithanny. This talk could probably be subtitled "What Gail and I Did Last Winter." So you've all seen purple hairstreak, I'm sure, and listened to many talks about them and things like that. Gail and I were introduced to the species by Chris Stamp via East Scotland on East Scotland Butterflies on Facebook, and in 2021. We since then, the last 4 years, we've been going out and finding lots of new sites across Lothians and the borders with a reasonable degree of success.
I should, for all of this stuff, thank Chris in particular, and also Ian Cow, the Borders Recorder, for encouraging us and nudging us forward through it. I should also obviously pick out my co-conspirator, Gail, my better half, she's waving there, who actually does most of the stuff. I just stand up and talk about it. All errors are mine, all brilliance is hers. So we usually go out and spot adults like this one in the summer. It's a fairly narrow flight period, about 3 or 4 weeks, from late July to late August. It's a busy time of year. The weather's not perfect. This can be quite frustrating. We don't get around anything like the number of sites we would like. There are also small butterflies at the tops of very big oak trees, so they can be rather difficult to spot. So these are the challenges. These are probably why they've not been found as much as probably they actually exist in the wild. So actually, before I go on, this is a male we found at Woodhall Dean, which is a great place to see them close up if you haven't already. They obviously lay eggs, like all butterflies. So, and we have, over the last few years, we have been going out and looking at eggs, initially at sites where we had seen the adults, so known sites. And also we were more focused initially on finding eggs in situ on the actual living trees, which is a challenge in itself, but quite good fun if you're bored in winter. They are a classic Lycinid egg. Let's see if this works. Yay. As you can see, it's sort of a little sea urchin, spikes, little dimple in the middle, fairly distinctive. They are laid on the terminal buds of oak trees, either tucked in under the buds like this one, or often down between the buds, which can be a little bit more challenging to spot. They start, when they're laid, they're absolutely bright white. And then over the time, they discolor. They stay on all winter, so they discolor. They go a bit green or a bit brown, depending on the situation they're in, and can get quite hard to spot. So that was what we were doing for the last few years. Then, obviously, from previous presentations today, you've seen eggs being used to go and track butterflies outside of their flight season or when their adults are hard to see. So that's an interesting thing to notice. And then there were 2 particular finds by other people early last winter. Our own Apithanny was one of those people who found an egg in Lauderdale. And also I'd mentioned Sheila Sim, who found one just by Duns. Now these are a very long way away from anywhere where adults had been seen flying before. And so we're finding new ground by finding the eggs. So that was interesting. I had a bit of time on my hands last winter for various reasons. So I thought, let's go and give this a try. Usual sort of way, we look for the eggs in the same way we look for the adults in terms of sites and situations. We look for sites where obviously oak woods. We look for places where oak has been a feature of that landscape over a long period of time. Not necessarily the trees themselves we're looking at, but oak in general has a long history there. This is Dewcree oakwood over behind Dewcree Dod by Stenton. One of the first sites we had to go at. And we went out there and we went out there to pick up windfall twigs during winter. You can either pick up the little twigs, or if you're really lucky, you get this kind of thing, where the entire top half of an oak is snapped off. Obviously sad in many ways, but it's mother lode for finding eggs. So great things to find in winter after storms. Hold that thought and think about the weather forecast for tomorrow. So they come down. They're great to go and when we want to get the twigs off the ends of those big bits of windfall. If you're working in more managed estates, remember that estate managers will tidy this kind of stuff up pretty quickly. So go out soon after the storm. Look for twigs with good, big, healthy buds. You want to be convinced that the buds were on the tree during the butterfly flight period and haven't fallen off earlier in the year. Those are good tips. I always now carry secateurs in my bag when I go out and about, but please only take actual windfall, not off live trees. Yeah, so those are the sites. I would, on the site side of things, just like to thank Cathy Baird, who I don't think is here today, I haven't spotted her, who gave us some great suggestions for where to go in East Lothian to find oakwoods, which was very useful indeed. The other thing we've done a bit differently, probably, compared with what people have done previously, is it is a numbers game. If you're picking up twigs, the chance of an egg being on it is relatively small, so we picked up a lot of twigs. At each point we surveyed, I filled one of these big reusable supermarket carrier bags full of chopped off ends of windfall twigs. I have all the bags numbered. Each time I pick up a bag like this, I put an entry into I record butterflies with the number of the bag, so that later on I can, if we find an egg in it, I can fill in the record properly, or I just delete the record if we don't find anything in that bag. But so it's all keeping track of which bag came from where is important. If you're lucky, and it doesn't happen that often, you can just pick one up and notice it in the field. Theme here is it's actually quite hard to do that. You either go to the same place, Apithanny did, go to the same place often, and then get it by the numbers game that way, or you pick up a huge number at once and play the numbers game that way. Right. We got these bags of eggs. Or hopefully of eggs, of oak twigs. We take them back home. We strip all the leaves off because they just get in the way. That is approximately 1 carrier bag's worth of twigs. Obviously, we got through quite a lot of them last winter. Filled our garden waste bin repeatedly by processing this stuff through. You need to examine each twig carefully under a spotlight using lenses, and you start to find eggs. It's really quite remarkable. Takes a while, but turn on Radio 3, long winter evenings fly by. That there is the reason why looking at under a spotlight at home is a good idea. You would not have found this one in the field. That is a purple hairstreak egg, right down between the buds in the depths. It's discolored, it's got clutter on top of it. There's some sort of little beastie sitting in front of it. I'm sure there's people in this room who could actually tell me what that was, but they're quite hard to spot. But when you're working at home under the spotlight, you can find them, and that does make things easier. So some are our finds. As an aside, the impression you get of the eggs here, like there, I think, hard to tell, isn't it? That is probably an accurate impression, as if you just pick up a twig in the field at first glance, if you've got reasonable sunlight, what you will see. It's a bit more than a speck. It's got size and it's kind of symmetric. That's the impression you get. Obviously, then you need one of these to actually look at it properly and work out what it actually is. We store them, all the eggs we pick up off windfalls. They're effectively thrown windfall, are effectively dead already. They're not dead, but they're not viable. And we collect them together. We keep them in the fridge. We keep them carefully. Where are they going to go? They're carefully labeled so that we know where they came from. And then the question is, what do you do with them? Some enthusiastic people will then home raise them, and that's a great thing to do if you want photographs. And Chris Stamp has done some presentations previously about that, and I'm sure they're available around the place. And that's a great thing to do if you've got the attention span. We are lazy and don't have the attention span. So what we do is we take them back out into the field in late March and tie wrap them back onto healthy oak foliage. Obviously, in sites where there are known to be purple hairstreak we put the eggs back that have come from that general zone of the country, so we don't mix them up too much. And that hopefully some of those eggs we've collected then turn into viable adults, which is the intent. So what do we find? 2 colors of dots here. You've got the orange dots are where we found eggs in Lothian, around the Lothians and into the borders. The red dots are where we picked up a bag and didn't find anything. The red dots are kind of from memory. The orange dots are exported back out of iRecord, so are probably slightly more accurate than my memory work. There's lots of dots we could talk about. I'm going to draw a couple out. here, Retreat Wood, by Abbey St Bathans, is probably the highest intensity purple hairstreak site we have ever seen. It's remarkable. It's complete purple pinball machine when you walk along there in the summer in the evening. Fantastic place to go and see them. We didn't know they were there until we looked for eggs. Honourable mention on that front is over here, which is New Byth Oakwood, which is also a good site for reliably seeing them pretty quickly if you go there on a summer evening. And again, nobody knew they were in that sector of the country at all until we went and looked for eggs. Conversely, we have all the ones around Aberlady and Lough Ness, where I went back several times through the summer, and we found a reasonable number of eggs. Eggs came easily there, but never saw an adult. Well, I got one sort of 90% not good enough to log glimpse of an adult there. So it shows that they can be very hard to see even when they are there. Another outlier is in Hermitage of Braid in Edinburgh, which is about 15 minutes walk from our house. And no idea they were there. We found one egg. I went back 4 times in the summer in near perfect conditions and didn't see any adults. Very stealth butterflies, very difficult to see. On this side over here at Camo Estate, you'll see there we've got one success dot, which was at the extreme northeast corner of Camo, and then I failed repeatedly anywhere west side and south side of Camo. I went back there last week, and the extreme west, the first of the red dot, the extreme west of the red dots there, would now change colour because we managed to find an egg there. So they're either it was a sampling randomness and I was luckier this time, or they're spreading into this west of Edinburgh there. Answers on a postcard. I will make no pronouncements on that. We also tried up north, because up north there are great oakwoods. It's fantastic. We had great hopes for finding great discoveries in all those wonderful oakwoods up there. You'll notice all of the dots on this chart are red. So we found nothing after we tried, reasonably extensively. So disappointing, but obviously we do know that down in Strathspey, sorry, there have been finds in the last few years, so they know they're up there. And actually, in this summer, just beyond where I've got the map, actually, down at Speen Bridge, Gail and I saw the adults flying. So they're definitely up as far as Speen Bridge. I wonder where else they are. Lots to go look for. We also looked. I failed to put the dot on for Granton-on-Spey. We had a look at Granton-on-Spey and didn't manage anything. So, in summary, it seems to be a good way to find new purple hairstreak sites, to go out, collect lots of twigs, and spend your evenings churning through them. It's quite effective. Finding them in places they were not known to be before. So that's obviously good. That's good. There are plenty of sites we found where, when we went back and looked for the adults, we struggled to find them. I mean, there were ones where we saw lots, but there were other places where we struggled to see the adults. Completely failed to see the adults. So that does suggest that this egg surveying approach, as opposed to the hunting and the adults in the summer, is more sensitive for going out and detecting whether they're at a site or not. So that's interesting. Obviously, only one winter's worth of work, so don't take too much from that, but it's interesting. It's a great way to spend the butterfly off season. What else are you doing between sort of October and March? Going, come on, this is great. This is butterflies. And on that topic, obviously Storm Ashley's coming in tomorrow. That will knock down a fair amount of oak. It's a southerly storm. It's going to come into the side of the trees, which the eggs are likely on, and will knock down a lot of windfall. So middle of next week onwards, great time. And the eggs at the moment are still quite bright and white. It's a nice and easy to spot. Be a great time to get out there and hunt for them. Go and check your local oakwood. And remember, you didn't see the adults. That doesn't mean they're not there. So go check that oakwood. And yeah, thanks for listening. That's me. This is just quickly, this is one we met at Muiravenside, Castle Hill at Muiravenside, which actually sat for a photograph confusingly on white beam, just to confuse us a bit, because we usually think of an oak, but there was oak trees all around the white beam, so that's why it's on white beam. We have a couple of example eggs with us, and I think Chris Stamper's got some as well. So if you want to see some after the close at the end, we'll happily show them around and let you see what they look like. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoff. Amazing effort, and definitely make sure you get out after the storm and have a look, because yes, questions.
There's been lots said about that from points to points, and we've been told at times, oh no, they're only on the pedunculate, or oh no, they're only on this wood, they're only on sessile. My finding on them is very simple. They are on the trees which are most commonly in the location you're finding them. They go, certainly sessile oak and pedunculate oak, the main wild species we get here, they use both perfectly happily, and all the points between, obviously the hybridize around between them. So I wouldn't worry about species of oak particularly. Some of the more rarefied species, the ones in parks, that might be a different question. I don't know. Yeah. So you could check, you could swither that question around and say, are they spreading or are we rediscovering them? That's a really hard thing to work out. I'm not going to make any factual statement on that. My general impression is that they are gently spreading to recover. And I could have another 15-minute talk on the background to that statement. But see the studies about them coming back into Epping Forest, which is an interesting set of studies.
Last but not least, it's Tom Prescott, and they're all still here, Tom, so they must be really looking forward to your Scottish update.
I shame them. So yeah, good afternoon, the final stretch. So what I'm going to do today is, as always, is give you a wee roundup of all the highlights that have come into me over the last week or two. So I email all you wonderful Vice County and area butterfly and moth recorders that collate all the records that come in. I get completely inundated with all the information that you say I must include. Lots of you send lots of lovely photos. So this is me trying to round that up. So what a year. So what do people think? When I sent out those emails, I thought that I would just get a couple of replies and lots of expletives saying, oh, you know, the weather. There was nothing. So what do you think? You don't think at all, do you? Well, I'll show you. So I was amazingly surprised how much came in. In fact, so much has come in that I'm not going to be able to cover much of it, actually, because it was just I was just inundated with information, which was superb. So if I get the right button, yes. What about small tortoiseshell? I think small tortoiseshell has had a horrendous year. I've hardly seen any at all. You know, with me, peacocks were always the one butterfly I would see in the garden that I wouldn't see many of, and small tortoiseshell was the commonest, but not this year. So Anthony replied to my email, which was a first, saying that on iRecord, he's only had 32 small tortoiseshell records so far this year, but almost 200 peacocks, whereas last year at this time he'd had 144, and the previous year 170 small tortoiseshell records. So that is an 80% reduction in the number of records. And, you know, I think that is echoed, certainly, you know, my experience. So, and what about the big butterfly count? So this is where we ask you to go out for 3 weeks, last week of July, the first 2 weeks of August, and spend 15 minutes in the countryside and record butterflies. And, you know, in Scotland, again, you've done an amazing, I mean, the figures that have come in. So there was 5,620 counts were undertaken by 3,587 people. I mean, where are they all? Why aren't they all here? And you recorded 22,818 butterflies. So a phenomenal number, but that was 20% down on the previous year. So last year there was an average count of 5 butterflies per count. This year it was just down to 4. And on the basis of that, BC called a butterfly emergency. And Three of these species, so Painted Lady, Red Admiral and Scotch Argus, all had their worst year in the 14-year history of big butterfly count, and Green-veined White had its second worst year. So these species really did poorly this year, certainly over the period of the big butterfly count. But butterfly emergency, what butterfly emergency? This is the lovely Logie Quarry, home to two lovely species, Dingy Skipper and Small Blue, and there are counts of over 100 of both of those species. As I said before, peacock, I think peacocks have had an amazing year, certainly over the last sort of month or two. There's been lots and lots of peacocks everywhere. Speckled wood is still expanding. It's now in Glasgow and it's doing well in Stirling. So it's not all doom and gloom. And we've just heard a wonderful talk about Purple Hairstreak. Well, Chris Stamp found them at Loch Petoulish in Strathspey. Bruce Tucker had them in Kincraig. Graham Crittenden up in the west of Sutherland, he's had a magnificent year for butterflies. He had red admirals in March, lots of peacocks, ringlets, which are now well established, which is a very rare butterfly up there, and the first painted lady since 2019. So like always, it is patchy, but it's good to get some positive news. And what about this? New butterfly for Scotland, gatekeeper. So there are a handful of 19th century records from southwest Scotland, from Dundonald and Cubitt, but there's no specimens. So whether they were genuine or not, it's unsure. But what's happened this year, so between the 25th of July and the 8th of August, there were 4 records by Ivan Lang at RSPB's Cook of Baldoon Reserve on Wigton Bay. And then on the 27th of July, Adam Murphy had one in Dumfries, but there were no photos. So were these genuine or not? And then George Thompson, who's written the book on the butterflies of Scotland, probably back in the 1980s, he had one in his garden, this one in his garden, in Lockerbie on the 18th of August. And then that followed others. 22nd of August, one in Dumfries by Karen Wright. The 30th of August, again, George had one in Woodlands between Annan and Lockerbie. So that's a total of 9 records at 5 sites. So has this butterfly just arrived, or has it always been here undetected? Well, interestingly, somebody found on iNaturalist, there was a record from Cairn Ryan with a photo from the 11th of August, 2021. So has Gatekeeper, or Hedge Brown, given its other name, been here ever since? And it's obviously easy to overlook. You know, it's a butterfly that I'm not very familiar with. It's very, very common down south. You see, the classic way to identify them is that they're a bit more colourful than meadow brown, and most of them, but not all of them, have those 2 lovely little white dots in the black circle. So that's a little bit variable. So get out there. I mean, they're in the similar habitat, nice long grass. So it's really exciting that we've got a new butterfly in Scotland, and it seems to be doing well. And yeah, get out there and look for it. So see how far and quickly it spreads, because its habitat should be good. And another amazing find, white letter hairstreak. Well, you probably heard me bang on a few years ago about it crossing the border, literally. It was just on the north side of the Tweed at Paxton, where Ian Cow had seen it in 2017. And then following that, some targeted survey work has found it up and down the Tweed, right up to Kelso. But this year, it's coming to the Lothians. Simon Metcalf had the first sightings at Holyrood and Alderston and Hermitage of Braid. Keith Edwards then, in his Dundee garden, having a cup of tea, best way to find butterflies, had a white letter hairstreak come into his buddleia. Now, Dundee is 60 miles due north from the then known northern limit at where the Tweed is, but the butterfly is not going to come right across the coast. So it's probably 100 kilometres around that this butterfly has moved. So again, has it just arrived, or is it a recent resident, or has it just been overlooked? So something to look for. So it's very similar to the life cycle of the purple hairstreak, but it's doing that on Wych elm. And you can see there's the, I've not got the Edinburgh Lothian records there, but you can see where it is along the Tweed and see how far north it must have gone to go all the way to Dundee. So quite remarkable. And it must be other places in between. So I think this is one that we need Chris Stamp to get looking for and encourage us all to get out there. Now, what about this? Camberwell Beauty, Kinrara, that's just up the road from me, just south of Aviemore. This was seen on the 16th of May. By a lady called Kate Menny. She didn't know what it was, so she posted it on the UK Butterflies Facebook page. The photograph, remarkably, was taken through her phone, through her binoculars. How the hell you do that, I really don't know, but she must be a contortionist. But anyway, she was quite shocked then when she was just got inundated with replies. So remarkable that Camberwell Beauty, just south of Aviemore. Holly Blue. Well, I can never come up here and not talk about Holly Blue, but again, it's on the move. You know, it was in air since 2011, and then it slowly moved up the west coast, and now it's in the Hamilton. It's been in the Hamilton area since 2019. First seen in Glasgow at Lynn Park in 2020. And then last year in other sites at Langside and Giffnock, and this year it's moved to various other sites, and it's actually now even in Kelvinside near the Botanic Gardens, also Dumbarton and Cumbernauld. So it's doing very well, and also there's records of the first and the second generation. So there's records of it being seen in the spring and then again in the autumn. And Holly Blue, as I'm quoting here, it is still the biggest news in Fife. How about that? So, and it's still causing excitement. So I think we heard earlier today that it is still in Aberdeen, which was a remarkable feat, but it really is consolidating its ground in Fife. And I've just to give you some figures. So there were 2 records in Fife in 2021, 3 in 2022, 180 in 23. And they reckon they're going to beat that in 2024. So it's just remarkable how it's increased. And what can you all see there? Yeah, so lovely to the left of the comma. Yeah, you can see the pupa. So this is in Bridget Primrose, who I think is live online in her garden in Muir of Ord. And we've had in the Highlands a number of records of caterpillars on blackcurrant. And again, Murray has had, in the Vice County of Murray, exceptional number of sightings. So 60 sightings of at least 73 individuals. So it really has taken off. One lucky observer had 8 together in Aviemore. And this is a fantastic photo. I really like this photo. So that is a comma caterpillar right in the centre of Granton-on-Spey. You can see the War Memorial there, and then in the background you can see it's a Sunday because the Sunday market is there. You can just about make out their stalls. So it's just amazing that you can find these, caterpillars and these things, in right where we live. So I think that's enough on the butterflies. Let's go over to the moths. Now, we saw today, those that were looking in the moth trap, there was a number of exciting migrant moths, and we've had a good year for migrant moths, and of course, most of those are around the coast. What about this site? So this is right in the centre of the borders. A site at Dryhope, the Upper Yarrow Valley, very close to St Mary's Loch. John Wright was being trapping there in the first week of September, and you can see there the list of amazing migrant moths that he has caught. I mean, it's just incredible. At such an inland site up in the hills that these migrants are turning up. So why is that? Is it a lack of light pollution? Are they flying high inland and over the hills and then attracted to his light? It really beggars belief, but what really does beggars belief is that he caught this. So they are all the way around the outside. They are a moth called Apithanny Bourne, the first record in the whole of Britain. The following night, one was caught in near Durham on the coast of Durham. I mean, if I caught that in my moth trap, you just think, well, it just looks a funny little mouse moth. And you can see in the centre, that is a mouse moth. So the mouth moths are browner and tend to have less or have more dots on the wings. So of course he didn't know what it was. He sent photos to various experts in this country and in Europe, and it came back to say that that's what it was. So it's not got a English name. So are we going to call it Wright's rustic or St Mary's mouse? Who knows? We'll have to have that will have to be decided. But it's not actually related to the mouse moth. It's actually in the same genus as Porter's rustic. And then what about this? What do folk think about this moth? Looks very much to me like a flame shoulder, but it's actually a Radford's flame shoulder. And this is new to Scotland. So Barry Prater caught one in Berwickshire on the coast on the 7th of October. And on the same night, on the other coast of Scotland, near Port William, Richard and Barbara Mearns caught one as well. So I don't know which one got up earlier than to check their trap to claim that they had the first for Scotland. And then Richard and Barbara caught 2 the following night. So that's 3. And this is usually limited to the southern parts of England, although it has had a really good year. And I think there have been other records since in Scotland over the last few days. So a new moth, Radford's flame shoulder. And scorched carpet. First for Scotland, it feeds on spindle. Peter Norman recorded it on the 8th of May at Carrickshaw. So another new species that's headed across the border. Now, who can identify this moth? It's quite tricky. Well, that's an orange footman, obviously. So this was seen by Anne Westerberg on the 9th of May. It's new to Scotland at Colvend, but there's no photograph. So, but the thing is that it was because it was seen on the 9th of May, that is the flight period. I mean, the orange footman is the very first footman to come out. And it really is, that will be at the peak of its flight period, whereas the other similar footmen are not out for another month or 2. So it's very, very likely that it is an orange footman. But that's up to the local recorder to see whether they will accept it or not. And then what about this? This is a dark spectacle, caught by Paul Brooks at Montrose Basin. So it's a good bit north from its previous known site. So it's probably moved up about 30 or 40 kilometres. But the good old Roy Leverton has suggested that given that this was caught in the 7th of September, when there were lots of other migrants around, that there is an identical or very similar species on the continent called Aberostra Asclepiades, or something like that. So is that what this is? So I think Mark has the specimen and is going to do the genitalia. And have you? Not yet. Oh, you could. Well, well, you'll have to let us all know, Mark. So that again would be new to the not just to Scotland, but yeah, new to the UK. So yeah, very, very exciting. And barred hooktip. I think last year I announced that this was new to Scotland. It feeds on beech, and it's been doing well in the north of England. So it was last year it was found in Cubitt and Dumfriesshire, but it's now made it into the borders. So Mark Newell trapped one at Stobo in Peeblesshire in August, and then Malcolm Lindsay had 3 occasions in August and September in Selkirkshire. So obviously beech is a very common food plant, very common in the wider countryside. So this species, seems to like Scotland as its home. So it's doing well. This was seen near Campbellton by Anne Hand. It's a muslin moth, but it's the Irish form of the muslin moth. So that's why I've called it the muck muslin moth. So that's the first time that form has been seen in Scotland. So again, very exciting that there's plenty of new moths, being seen at this time of year. This was put on iRecord from being seen on Sky yesterday. I don't have any more details than that, but Keith Sadler, who is the county moth recorder for the island, just emailed me last night to say that, and sent me this photo. So that has just arrived. very unusual. There was also one on Bressay on Shetland, seen at the end of July, and that's the 4th record for Shetland. Blue underwing or Clifton nonpareil, a wonderful, wonderful moth. Last year there was 7 seen last year in what would it be, East Lothian by Catty. And this year, so that sort of showed with such a high density, maybe they were potentially breeding. And Catty had 3 at that same wood on the 14th of September, and then 2 on the 20th of September. So are they its progeny? So is this actually now a breeding species in Scotland in that popular wood? That would be wonderful. And these photos are actually from Richard Mearns, who caught them at Kirkstone on the 5th of October, and that's the 2nd record for Dumfries and Galloway. I mean, a superb, superb moth. So that's all the highlights from a Scottish sense of the macros. Should we start getting into those really exciting micros now? So how about this? It doesn't come much better than that. So this was found by Malcolm Lindsay, new to Scotland. And then 4 days later, Jeremy Wilson had one in his garden near Humble in East Lothian. So the brand new micro for Scotland. And then this is a lovely story. So Rubens has stood up here in the past and talked about their amazing efforts trying to find out more about Lampronia capitella, the current shoot borer at its single site outside Peebles near Eashel Sewerage Works. It's associated with currants, particularly red currants, but also black currants and also gooseberry. So one of our wonderful volunteers, Joe Davis, took it upon him to look for this moth, either as an adult or to have these characteristic wilting shoots because the caterpillar is in those buds. He walked up and down the Clyde for days and days looking for signs of this moth, couldn't find it, came home, looked in his fruit cage in his garden, and there it was. Remarkable. So that's now the 2nd site in Scotland for this moth. So it just shows you knowing the signs and going out there and looking, but particularly in your garden, a bit like that comma on the high street, comma caterpillar on the high street in Granton. So yeah, amazing story. Current shoot borer. So this moth, Scrobipalpa clintoni, was first found new to science a number of years ago on the west coast. It's named in honour of Teddy Pelham Clinton, and it's found, as you can see from that distribution map, on the sort of western fringes of Scotland. It's associated with curled dock. You can see there it's feeding within the stem of the curled dock. You can see its exit hole and then the pupa inside. And remarkably, Mark Young, well, he's not there looking for dissecting moths, found it actually at Cullen on the east coast. So is it more widespread on the east coast? So that was last year he found signs of it. He confirmed it this year, and then Steve Palmer went back and they refound it there, and also a mile to the east and a mile to the west of that, where they originally found it. So there's obviously a wee population there. Is it elsewhere? So you need to go out and look for in the autumn or in the spring, look for these holes, and then if you open them up, you might be lucky enough to find a pupal case within the sort of pith of the stem. So Scrobipalpa clintoni. And this is 2 photos of 2 different individuals of a moth that first recorded in the UK in London in 2003. And then there were no further records until it was found near Rosemarkie by Peter Hall in his garden on the Black Isle. So that was 3 or 4 years ago. The population there seems to be a population there. It's not been recorded anywhere else apart from Peter's garden following the first sightings in London. But it's now crossed the Murray Firth. Tracy had one in her garden in Culloden, and Al McNee had one in Inverness. So it's associated with spruce, and there seems to be a population now in and around Inverness. So what I'm going to do now, so that's the highlights. So they're the sort of top species. I'm now going to very quickly run through region by region, area by area. Normally I do this by meandering, by starting off in the south and meandering up the coast, up through the country and ending up in Orkney and Shetland. Well, it's easier, isn't it, to go downhill. So this time I'm going to start in Orkney and Shetland because they always sort of, by the time I get to the end, I'm always rushing because I'm out of time. So we're going to start it in Orkney. And it's really interesting when I, get all these highlights in, how, what we would consider in many parts of Scotland as common species are very, very scarce elsewhere. So the scalloped oak is the second record for Orkney. The pied rabbit moth, Ipsilaipha sequela, is new to Orkney. The delicate, caught by my old friend Keith Fairclough, is new to Orkney, as is the clouded silver. So some, new finds are way up north in Orkney. And some old friends. There was the elephant hawk moth. It's been first recorded in 2021, but now it is resident. There were a number of sightings of the caterpillars, so it's taken up residency in Orkney. And the death's head hawk moth was found on North Ronaldsay, actually alive. There's most of the records of this wonderful, wonderful moth are dead, but dead specimens. But this was a live one on North Ronaldsay. In Shetland, as they say, it's only the second year since the 1990s when there's been regularly trapping that they haven't had a new species added to their list. They have other things that were exciting. They had 5 delicates over the autumn where there's only been one previous record. They caught their 3rd to their 5th flame carpets, their 5th and 6th double-striped pugs, and their 5th to their 8th frosted oranges. In West Sutherland, they got their first ever footman with a redneck footman. As we move down the country, Wester Ross, the 4-dotted footman is new for the Vice County. The orange sallow was at Inverurie, was only the 4th. The frosted orange was their 3rd. The buff-tip caterpillars were on Turkey oak. They were surprised to find this in Inverurie Gardens on a sort of an alien oak, on this sort of exotic tree. And they've also had very good numbers of cinnabar moth larvae, and this was the first year they've actually recorded the adults. Skye, slim pickings, that's what I was reported. Just one new macro moth. They've had this scarce prominent recorded by Bob McMillan, but they had 3 new micro moths. East Sutherland, these were both by Peter Stronach. Chamomile shark, the first for East Sutherland that's found as a caterpillar, as they often are. And Lunar hornet came to Allure, but both those were new to the county. If we come from East Sutherland down to East Ross, again, Peter Stronach had Welsh clearwing first time on the 14th of July. He had these two to Allure. And copper underwing is spreading with 5 individuals. Buff footman is firmly established with 48 individuals recorded from Rosemarkie. So that really is, definitely now in Easter Ross. We come a little bit further south. We're now in Mike Taylor's Vice Counties of Murray and East Inverness-shire. The eyed hawk moth was the first record for Murray. It was found on the Willow near Garmouth in the middle of May. So it's not a species known to migrate or be currently extending its range. Therefore, importation via the garden trade cannot be ruled out. Speckled yellow was the first for Murray. Swallowtail moth was also the first for East Inverness-shire, caught in Inverness by Al McNee. The white pinion spotted again was also first, as was the alder moth. So all these were new for one of either of those 2 Vice Counties. These are some of the micros that were new. Again, all these are first records for either Murray or East Inverness-shire. The Coleophora there was again one from Peter Stronach, who seems to have done really, really well this year with lots of new Vice County records. I should really mention the top left one, which was found by our very own David Hill. Surprisingly, it was on goldenrod. He was obviously looking for the larvae of his beloved Anania funebris and found that larvae there, which was first for East Inverness-shire. Now into Aberdeenshire. Again, these are all new for the Vice County. And the other remarkable record was 55 Kentish glories in 3 traps on one night at Muir of Dinnet. I mean, phenomenal to get that number of Kentish glories together on one night. Montrose Basin, this is Paul Brooks, who I don't think is here today. Yeah, he had a real purple patch on the west coast, on the east coast at Montrose Basin. On the 6th of September, he caught the Anania coronata along with the Ex Timalis. The next night, he got the Vitrialis and 2 convolvulus hawk moths that landed within an each other. The following night, he then, on the 4th of October, he then got Delicate and Red Underwing, and as he described, a shed load of cetaceous Hebrew characters. And also Nigel Voden from Fife reported similar good numbers of migrants over the similar period. So 10 small mottle willows, for instance. We now come to East Perthshire. All these were new to the Vice County. The narrow-bordered bee hawk moth was found on Steve Kidd's house wall in Fowlis, just to the east of Dundee and therefore just within the Vice County. The northern dart was found by a party of botanists looking for montane flora in Glen Shee, and it's the first Vice County record since 1838. I wonder whether that was one of yours, Mark, was it? And Eleanor Stamp, trying to outdo Chris, had the first chamomile shark for the VC. This is the standout record for West Perthshire, recorded by Ken Brown in Tillicoultry, and it was trapped near Limes. And is it overlooked? Is it expanding its range? And also the convolvulus hawk moth. Again, interesting to get an inland record from the Trossachs. Stirlingshire. So the top 2 are Devon carpets. The first one was recorded by Martin Culshaw near Strathblane. It landed on his welly boot as he was setting his moth traps up that evening. He didn't have a pot with him. There's a lesson. Lots of expletives. He managed to take that photo of his Wellington with the moth on it with his phone, and then fortunately in the morning there were 5 other Devon carpets within his moth trap. So it's obviously a good site now for that moth. And there's various other reports of Devon carpet doing well in Scotland and moving north. And the Burnet moth there, the narrow-bordered 5-spot Burnet, that's the was found in a large mixed colony along with 6-spot burnets, and this represents the further significant western movement of this burnet moth in central Scotland. Lanarkshire, again, these are all new for the VC. The Bucolatrix was Richard Weddell put his moth trap out on his kitchen window ledge one night in August, and he didn't catch anything in the trap, but nearby was the Bucolatrix, also called the lime tuft. There's lots of limes around there, and that was the first adult record for the VC. So it was quality, not quantity. On Mull, well, there's always lots to report from Mull. I mean, I can't go through them all, but there were 4 new macros for Mull that were Vice County firsts. There were 2 new for Cole and 2 for Tyree, and 8 new micro moths for the Vice County, all of which are on Mull, apart from 1 on Cole. So again, there's Devon carpet showing that that's moving north. As we head south to Bute, this is all I got from Bute. In terms of photographs, this is Blair's shouldered knot that is new and the furthest western record in Scotland for this moth. And there were 6 new micros that were new to the Vice County, and they were all on Bute as opposed to being on Arran. In the Lothians, well, I got inundated from Mark with lots and lots of exciting information, so I'm not able to do that justice here. But the thing that really caught my eye was that they went out in a search in a field next to Morrison's superstore in Bathgate, and while they were looking for narrow-bordered 5 spots, they found the Aproemia Cinctella, which is the first for eastern Scotland. And then Nigel Voden went back the following day, and he also found another exciting moth, which was new to West Lothian, Elachista luticamella. So that, and another of the original species at that site. The sharp-angled peacock is Scotland's third ever record, following ones on Bute and in Renfrewshire. And the small plume was new to the VC, found by Alison Averis in her East Lothian garden. So again, all happening in Lothian. And what about this? This is the wing of a lime hawk moth. Mark went to visit Keith Bland, who lives in Edinburgh, and he showed him this wing, which he was given as a road casualty by somebody way back in 2020. So it was found on a road in North Berwick. So there's the only other records of this moth are actually from Glasgow in 20. Yeah, I'm not quite sure when, but this is the only record away from Glasgow. So a moth wing of a moth being knocked over by a car. Northern dart. A few years ago, Malcolm Lindsay ventured up into the hills in the Scottish borders and refound northern dart populations. They found them in two populations up there, and every year him and teal go back there, or every other year, because it has a 2-year life cycle, and this is them going back this year and showing that the moth is still present. But they're very concerned because they must be severely threatened by climate change being so far south. But you can see they go and do an all-nighter. So in that particular time, really misty conditions. So a very evocative photo and lovely, lovely moth. And yeah, this is Reuben. So I hope you're not sitting too close to Reuben. Reuben had a whole heap of different micros that were new to the Vice-County, but this was the one that he was particularly proud of, he said. So far there's been 4 new micros in Selkirkshire, 7 in Roxburghshire and 5 in Peebles, including this common closed moths, which he found in 2 different houses in Peebles. So new to the Vice-County. And in Berwickshire, Barry Prater has been doing some targeting trapping with all the migrants coming in, and these are some of you can see the site there where they're trapping, and these are some of the migrants that they've caught. Lovely convolvulus hawk moths, mottle willow, and delicate. Catching lots of really good migrants there on the coast in early September, the same time that Paul Brooks was catching his further up. And also in Berwickshire, the bordered pug is new to the borders, and the first record away from the fourth. The dusky lemon sallow has been, it was recorded quite well up to the 1980s, and then a long gap until 2021, but there's been 3 new sites this year in 24. The grass emerald was not previously known from southeast Scotland, but quite widespread in Northumberland to the south. That was found by David Bryant. And the barred rivulet is another new site for that species, and just the 3rd for the Vice-County in 60 years. And finally, we'll go to Dumfries and Galloway. Lots of exciting things down in Dumfries and Galloway. Again, convolvulus hawk moths. The eyed hawk moth was from Loch Maben on the 1st of June. So that's the 16th record for the county, but the last one was in 2018. The marbled white spot, there were a number of records of that. So again, some exciting finds, and a few micros as well that they found. Some of these were by Ian Leach, the Yarrow case bearer found at Luce Bay, and all these are new records for the Vice-County. And also, finally, the Dumfries and Galloway have got they've updated their website, their moth website. It's been revamped this year with up-to-date records and revised descriptions and photographs, most of which are Ian Leach's amazing photos. And it's there for all to use, whether you live in the Vice-County or you're visiting. So a really, really good resource there. So that's me. So thank you, everybody, particularly everybody that sent in their records. As always, it's a real whiz through all the highlights. I was amazed how many we got, particularly given the conditions. And I'm sure I've got lots and lots of things wrong and lots of things that I've missed out that perhaps people think, yes, that was an important find and you missed it out. So that's all my fault. So thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of our programme for today. I hope, like me, you've had a wonderful time listening to such great speakers and that you've learned something new. Today has been a real celebration of volunteer effort, And I hope you are all feeling inspired to collect twigs, deliver talks, and plan exciting adventures in quest of rare moths. As always, I would like to say a huge thank you to the Scottish team for making this event possible, and in particular, Anthony, who worked so hard to make sure everything runs smoothly on the day. Thank you to our hosts, the AK Bell Library, and fantastic speakers who travelled here to present to you today. And the biggest thanks of all go to you, the audience, for giving up your Saturday and for everything you do to help butterflies and moths. It's been a pleasure to hear you all chatting away today and seeing you getting stuck in with our fundraising activities too. So thank you very much. So that's all from me. Please have a safe journey home, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon in the new season. Thank you very much.